never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
And you just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam.
So,
who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL Podcast. Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson. We're here with the series that everyone was asking for from last year. We're bringing it all back, fixing your team in 5 minutes. Today it's your AFC East and South edition. How you doing, Sam?
Good. How about you, Steve?
Doing great. Before we get into it, though, of course, we have to you promised the people that we would have our dueling charities ready to go. And I haven't completely done my homework, but we're gonna do this anyway.
Okay. I mean, I have mine completely ready to go. You just didn't do your homework. Is that what you're telling me?
I've got some options. So I don't have my GoFundMe set up. I didn't know we were supposed to have the GoFundMe set up right now.
Do you have any part of this ready to go?
I've got a charity.
Okay.
I've got potential options for the punishment. We'll see how.
What do you mean potential options? We've had potential options for weeks. This was where you choose the option.
Yeah, but I'm going to let you go first and see what see what you're rolling with here.
Okay. Well, I have a GoFundMe set up. If you go to my Twitter now.
No. You can't push people there yet. You can't until I'm set up.
This is how this works. If I do my homework, I can get a jump on this.
All right.
So if you go to @PFF_Sam, it is my pinned tweet. The GoFundMe is set up, ready to go. I am donating money for a group called Sunshine Kids. And what Sunshine Kids do is raise money to put on fun activities, group activities for kids with cancer. So, childhood cancer. I think there's something that happens to you once you have a kid where you start to have this insane degree of empathy with just any childhood illness that you didn't have before. So anytime you see sick kids, it hits the heartstrings for me. They put on like group activities to, provide some fun entertainment just for kids to feel like kids for once again. And I think that that's an extremely valuable thing to do. I've also discovered while we've been doing this, that there is a whole world of like quality, spectrum of quality when it comes to charities, and like how much of the money you raise actually goes to the thing they do, as opposed to like buying office space in Manhattan and all that kind of crap. So the Sunshine Kids charity is rated extremely highly by the places that rate charities. They give all like a huge amount of their money percentage-wise to the thing they're actually supposed to be doing. And the thing they're supposed to be doing is raising money for kids with cancer to feel like kids again for a while. So I think that's a really worthwhile thing to be doing. My forfeit, as you might be able to tell from the graphic down there in the bottom right, if we raise the money and I win, I will recreate a Jackson Mahomes TikTok video dance from start to finish, including the dress. I think I can repurpose the Steve wig from the baseball thing. If I spin it backwards, I think I can get that like curly quiff thing at the top. I bought a Chiefs starter jacket. I need a big chain from somewhere, and then I need to learn how to dance. And then I'm good.
Based off what I'm looking at right now, I don't think you have to learn how to dance.
Well, maybe not, but it probably needs something more than I'm capable of doing. Either way, I've got to figure out how I learn one of these routines, and that's gonna suck.
I am. So I love the charity. That's awesome, Sam. I'm angry at society that what I'm looking at right now is actually like something people watch.
Yeah.
I'm actually
that guy's got
mad
a lot of followers. What's he got?
I don't know, but I'm mad at humanity for it.
Jackson Mahomes TikTok. Google says the man's got 244 million views.
Did he just flash the camera? Did he just... Oh, you got to do the shirtless one.
No, that's not happening. I'll
You
wear
gotta do the shirtless one.
Chain. We're not doing this topless. That's something that people can't deal with. Maybe there's a stretch goal. We can go topless. We'll see.
I'm really upset. I was going to do this, by the way, because somebody suggested that. I was going to do the TikTok thing.
Well, maybe if you'd done your homework, you could have done that. But
I let you go first too. All right. I'm still.
So anyway,
give me till the end of the day. I'll have
Sam.
my official punishment.
PFF_Sam. Go donate money right now, and make sure mine wins because Steve didn't even bother doing his.
What's the cutoff here? When are we doing this until?
I set a goal of $2,500. We just have to put a date on it, and whoever's got the most money raised at that date, that's who wins.
All right.
Obviously, the date will have to be after you've actually bothered to set yours up.
Yeah, by the end of the day, mine will be set up, and I'll have it tweeted out. That's good. Great charity, Sam. And you're right. I mean, it is good to make sure that the money's going to something useful. So I like that. That's great.
Which it turns out is like a bigger hurdle than you would have thought it was, right? You just assume charity gives money to the good things. There's places out there that are pretty sketchy.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was going to go from a. Do you have anything else to add to that, by the way?
No, that's my pitch done. I will. If you want to see me dressed like Jackson Mahomes doing some kind of TikTok dance, that's how to make it happen.
I was going to default because somebody suggested the Jackson Mahomes TikTok dance, and that seemed like it's in the sweet spot of, bad, but, not jump through a table, break your back bad,
Yeah.
Should I break out the table?
I think you should, but,
Maybe I'll jump through a table with my Josh Allen jersey, potentially. All right, I'll officially get the punishment at the end of the day. I'm going back to the first charity that we did, which was Heritage House over here in Cincinnati, because they are near and dear to my heart. They're close to my heart. They house at any point 50 to 75 recovering men of all ages, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever it might be. So it's right here in Cincinnati. It's in our backyard. The success of the program has been unbelievable, and I'm always trying to do anything I can to give back to them. So that's going to be my charity again. It's a faith-based recovery program over here in Cincinnati. So I'm going back to Heritage House, and I'm actually going to, I think to really, maybe I'll get my friend who manages the house on. If we can get him 3 minutes, we can help sell this thing a little bit. Is that legal? 3 minutes. I'm going to give him 3 minutes of podcast time to tell the people why they need to donate to Heritage House. But yeah, see, look, we got it up here on the YouTube channel right now. So that's where we're going to go. I teased a potential haircut. My wife nixed that. Well, maybe that would win though, Sam.
I'm convinced that if you got, like you were saying, go back to your high school haircut, which for most people is like a much worse haircut than the one they're currently rocking, right? Like if I went back to a high school haircut, the hair would A, be longer and existing, and B, would be some kind of weird, like long flow deal, right? So generally speaking, most people's high school haircuts are a lot worse than the thing they currently have. Your high school haircut was like a buzz cut. You got that, and you would look in the mirror and be like, why have I not had this for the last 15 years?
No.
What have I been doing with this ridiculous, like, Jerry curl, like, extra from Coming to America deal I've had going here?
I do not want to lose
look at that
my curls
and question everything you've done in the last 15 years of life.
No, I would want to get back to this as soon as possible, and it would probably take 6 months. So that would be, maybe the residual effect is not what we're looking for here. But I'll have my GoFundMe set up for Heritage House, and I'll have my official write-up by the end of the day. Okay? So nobody donate to Sam until I'm set up. Make sure we're ready.
No, I think you should respect the process, and therefore just out of sheer, respecting the person that did his homework and not the guy that didn't, you should be donating to my charity.
If I put my high school haircut over there, I could see you taking your charity money and actually throwing it over to me just to see that. That's what I would do. That, unfortunately, not your charity money, but I could see you,
Sunshine Kids.
I could see you taking your own checkbook and throwing it out.
Oh, I would definitely donate to see you have to have a normal haircut.
This is a normal haircut. This is legit. Anyway, we're having a lot of fun with this. We thank everybody that has gotten involved in the previous charities. What are we, over 15,000? Close to 20,000?
Just under 15,000.
Just under 15 so far through 5 charity drives. So we're going to keep this going, and we appreciate everybody that's involved. And we'll keep reminding you. We're not going to spend the whole show on this, but we'll keep reminding you. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @PFF_Steve, at @PFF_Sam, and we'll keep you updated on this charity drive. Ready to get into some football?
There's a lot of people that are mad when we talk about charity.
Yeah,
there's a small vocal minority of people that get upset when we do anything other than talk about football. But ultimately, we're raising $15,000 for charity, so those people can deal with it for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, absolutely, they can. And but people tune in to get to do some football as well. So you ready to get into this series here?
Yep.
All right. So we're going to start in the AFC East. We did this last year. The genesis of this was we were going to do a show where we were going to hit every team, and we were going to do it rapid fire. All 32 teams. We were going to fix every team in 5 minutes. And we started with the Dolphins or something last year, and all of a sudden it just went off the rails. And we're like, all right, forget the 5-minute thing. We're all in. We're just going to go each team one by one and give you a full breakdown. It turns out it turned into about 4 shows. Turned into 4 shows exactly. So we could fit about 8 teams into one show. So we're going to fix each team using the draft, free agency, and potential moves. Let's start with the Buffalo Bills because we're going through the AFC East right now. Bills coming off a divisional round loss their last 2 seasons. We've got an AFC championship loss, divisional round loss. So now to fix the Bills, they don't need fixing. They need to get over the hump. How are the Bills going to get to a Super Bowl, Sam? What do you think the biggest keys are this offseason for the Bills, and what are some potential fixes here?
Well, the thing for the Bills is just stay the course. Like, I actually think Buffalo is one of those teams that they're in the right place. They're moving in the right direction. They assembled this entire roster, to beat Kansas City. They had Kansas City beat, and then 13 seconds worth of implosion, and they didn't have them beat anymore. So they're a team that the danger would be you overreact to that one defeat and you're like, blow it all up. Let's start over. Let's figure out, where we went wrong. And let's figure out all the problems. No, you're moving in the right direction. This thing is headed in the right place. You probably should have been a Super Bowl team this year. You're not. Just re-up, maintain the roster, continue, turning over the depth in the areas that's applicable. Keep building on the defensive line, keep bringing in guys like Emmanuel Sanders on these low, relatively low deals to be part of a really good receiving core, and just re-up. Let's see what happens next year.
Yeah, I mean, when you look, we already did our team needs piece, right, which is different than this, where we're trying to, maybe give some suggestions and everything here. There aren't glaring needs for the Bills. That number 2 cornerback spot is something we've talked about for a couple of years now. You do want to have somebody opposite Tre'Davious White that could be an upgrade over Levi Wallace, who hits free agency, and so I could see corner, being one of those spots where they could really upgrade. I also think one of the places they should look is the interior of the defensive line and free agent. We just did today strengths and weaknesses of the free agent draft in the on the PFF NFL Daily. And we said the interior of the defensive line is not the best place to upgrade here in free agency, but in the draft there are some players, and I wonder if getting one of those big defensive linemen that's going to help you in games against the Patriots, in games against a Colts power running game, right? We talked a lot this year about how the Bills are built to beat the Chiefs, but you also want some flexibility to beat some of the better running teams in the NFL. I wonder if they're primed for a guy like a Jordan Davis, who is the monster 330-pounder from Georgia. I don't know if he's going to go in the middle of the first round like a lot of people have predicted, just because he doesn't bring much as a pass rusher. But the way the Bills like to invite the run, play coverage, Jordan Davis is going to be a good fit for a lot of different defenses because he can hold the point, hold up against double teams, opens things up for their linebackers. Either him or a Travis Jones, another 350-pounder out of UConn, who could be more of a second-round type of player. I wonder if the Bills need to spend a draft pick on one of those big, huge interior defensive linemen to complement the edge guys that they got last year, the developmental Greg Rousseau Boogie Basham. I wonder if a true nose tackle should be, on the list here for the Bills.
Yeah, or they also got a career year last season out of Harrison Phillips, a guy they drafted in the third round a few years ago. And he is that type of run stuffing specialist, nose tackle. He's not the same size as a guy like a Jordan Davis, but, he's a 310-pound plus-ish type of run stuffing specialist that doesn't offer a ton as a pass rusher. And he's scheduled to hit free agency this season. Maybe I don't know that his market will be huge simply because of the style of player he is. He's exactly the kind of player that you look at, the first stage of team building or the offseason is, of all the guys you have that are scheduled to hit free agency, who are you going to prioritize and try and keep, and who are you going to actually let test the market and hit the offers and see where they go. Harrison Phillips for Buffalo is one of their guys that's coming up and expected to be a free agency, and is one of the guys that I would imagine they would actually be interested in keeping around and seeing if they can retain him for a relatively modest deal and keeping that part of the defense intact. Because I agree, that's definitely a part of this defense that I think needs a little bit of attention. They've been a bit unfortunate with injuries in that area. Like Harrison Phillips himself got injured, not last year, but the year before. Star Lodolele has been injured as well. They haven't necessarily gotten a ton of production out of the guys they brought in to man that particular spot. But I wonder if Phillips is a guy they would try and keep because of that.
Yeah, it's not a bad thought there. Again, like when you go through this roster, there's not a whole bunch of players that are hitting free agency. The other guy on the defensive line, or a couple guys on the defensive line, Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, so maybe edge depth, which, last year at this time, again, the Bills didn't have massive needs, and they drafted, when you look back a year and you say, okay, they drafted a Gregory Rousseau who contributed as a rookie, did a nice job, but he might really take his big steps forward here in year 2 or in year 3. They drafted a year early, the Bills, right? A year before Jerry Hughes hit free agency, or drafting a big tackle like Spencer Brown, who could take over at right tackle, push Darrell Williams into guard. So they did a really nice job adding depth in the draft last year. So it's not that edge is a huge need, but I've also seen some of the late first round, like David Ojabo from Michigan, designated pass rusher types that could step in, replace Jerry Hughes, be a good late first round pick there as well. So I do think defensive line's another place that they're going to look at, whether it is Harrison Phillips at nose, whether it's a fresh nose tackle from the draft, adding another pass rusher in there. The other place I'm intrigued about, because they're officially 3 deep at receiver. When Gabriel Davis breaks out and looks like Jerry Rice, he was the 4 to start the season technically. Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders. Sanders is gone, Gabriel Davis. They've got this top 3 group of receivers, which is great. You can add depth there, sure. But what is this right now?
We getting heckled live?
Oh, wow. I guess so. I'm just dropping that right on there. Doesn't matter why you're at home. Doesn't matter. What about tight end? Dawson Knox has shown some flashes where he's been this key target. What about like a Zach Ertz? And getting a guy as a hired gun, 1-year tight end to come in, work the middle of the field. We still saw Zach Ertz add a ton of value to that Arizona Cardinals offense. I think Ertz would be a nice fit. Have him and Dawson Knox as potential options, and again, just attack with a ton of playmakers and make it so difficult to cover the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I think they really like what they get in Dawson Knox generally. I think that overall, this is a team that likes to win with wide receivers as opposed to their tight ends. They're not one of these multiple tight end set type of sides. That there's a reason they've gone so heavy and so deep in the wide receiver group, and they want to really attack they want to really attack that wide receiver group. And when you look at how much 11 personnel the team runs 71% of the time, there's space for a second tight end. It's not like it would be a bad option just to have, particularly as a contingency for Dawson Knox. But I don't know if they're going to want to prioritize that over making sure that wide receiver depth stays intact. So, Emmanuel Sanders presumably leaves. That leaves you with Diggs, with Gabriel Davis, with Cole Beasley. you're still going to want to make sure that you have contingency beyond those guys, because wide receiver cores now, it's not necessarily about how good is your 1 to 3. It's what is the depth like when you have to turn to it, because one of those guys is going to get injured at some point. And we saw that with Tampa Bay this past season. We saw it with a bunch of teams actually, but Tampa Bay is a good one where, 1, 2, 3 was incredible for the Bucs. It's as good as anything out there. But by the end of the season, it was like Mike Evans on his own, getting this thing done, because they didn't trust anybody that had to step in after Godwin goes down, after Antonio Brown gets booted off the team. And all of a sudden, Scotty Miller, they didn't seem to have any trust in. Tyler Johnson, there wasn't a ton of trust in. They just didn't have the depth that they trusted to be able to step into a bigger role. So for Buffalo, I would much rather invest that spot in an Emmanuel Sanders replacement than a guy to complement Dawson Knox.
I'm not going to give them Will Fuller. I'm not going to start team 1 out of 32 and go to Will Fuller. So really? What about a guy like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, a designated deep threat? Gabriel Davis is already kind of that guy because he plays crazy fast on the field. But a Valdes-Scantling who could catch the 75-yard bombs from Josh Allen, add him there too. So there's not much to fix here with the Bills. This was an easy one to start. I think it's defensive line depth. I think a deep threat receiver would be great, a very to complement those other pieces. Valdes-Scantling, a Will Fuller, another speed receiver in the draft. They do need a starting left guard and a starting corner opposite Tre'Davious White, whether they're going to bring Levi Wallace back or go to the draft for that. But Bills are looking pretty good. There's not much to fix there, Sam. They fixed, though?
Yeah, the Levi Wallace thing is interesting because we've made that point for years that they're going to be trying to replace Levi Wallace for basically the entirety of the guy's career. And he keeps coming back and showing that actually he's as good as anybody as their second starter. All of a sudden, Levi Wallace is actually scheduled to hit free agency. So now you have to make a conscious decision. Do you want to keep this guy or are you going to let him walk? And, given that they're essentially trying to replace him year on year, there's a pretty good chance they do end up letting him walk. And with Tre'Davious White coming back from a serious injury, it just becomes an area of potential concern. Like, you need to think about what that cornerback group is going to look like this year and make sure that it doesn't suffer this big drop off. So to me, it's really just about plugging the small holes in the depth that are appearing just as the course of year-on-year turnover. So Emmanuel Sanders, Ike Butker, Jerry Hughes, Harrison Phillips, Levi Wallace, these are all guys scheduled to hit free agency. I would think about bringing back 2 or 3 of those guys. Harrison Phillips, Levi Wallace would be guys I would try and get back in the building if the deal is low enough. And then you got to try and plug the hole. So Emmanuel Sanders is an interesting one. I don't hate the Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but there are guys lower down. Even somebody like Zay Jones is hitting free agency, and Zay Jones really stepped up
back
for the
to
Raiders
Buffalo
this year. Yeah, someone like Zay Jones really stepped up for the Raiders this year when everybody else fell apart. And it's not like Zay Jones is amazing, but he's shown that if the rest of the depth chart fall apart around him, he can do a little bit more than people give him credit for.
The one other name I just wanted to throw out there, Trent McDuffie is a cornerback out of Washington. He's number 2 right now on the PFF draft board. And you're going to hear me say this a lot. I don't know where the NFL values him. I don't know where Mel Kiper values him. I'm purposely in the foxhole not paying attention to what other people are paying attention to. I know he's number 2 on our board, and I don't think I've seen someone move this smoothly at the cornerback position in a while. Great zone corner. So again, I don't know if he's there late first round, but there might not be a better fit for the Bills in the first round than a Trent McDuffie out of Washington. He might not fit the bill. He's under 6 foot. Not sure where his arm length is going to land, so he might not fit the bill for a lot of teams. So he could actually be there in the late first round if he's there. Man, I would love to see him paired with Tre'Davious White. So we have some options here, and I think we've hit on some good options that are going to get the Bills over the hump because we're not fixing them. We're getting them to the Super Bowl. And I think getting a few of those players back and then dabbling in free agency, as we just discussed, will get the Bills to their championship. All right, we're going to go to another team in a minute, but the PFF NFL Podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Well, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions help you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, to the Miami Dolphins. Where are we fixing the Dolphins, Sam? And why is it the offensive line?
Because they had one of the worst offensive lines we've ever seen. I think that would be the why. They're an interesting team because that offensive line was historically wretched, and it was historically wretched behind a quarterback, or in front of a quarterback, and within a system that actually didn't do a terrible job of protecting it in terms of RPOs, in terms of getting the ball out of Tua's hands quickly. It was worse than it looked, is my point, and it looked terrible. So they're a team that actually just needs to spend this entire offseason hammering the ever-loving crap out of the offensive line in free agency, in trades, in the draft, everything on the offensive line, and hope that it's enough. And with Mike McDaniel coming over, that the whole thing is enough to make Tua look viable, or not just viable, but like a ceiling high enough for them to compete.
Are they as of right now, per overthecap.com, Dolphins are number one in effective cap space. So as far as going into free agency, they've got money to spend if they want to. We do always caution you're not just throwing money at all the top guys. It's not necessarily the way to build a team. But is this the team that should be throwing everything at Teron Armstead, number 2 on our free agent board, get him in to solidify the left tackle spot? When you talk about Mike McDaniel coming over from the Niners, he just had Trent Williams at left tackle. Trent Williams coming off of one, the best year we've ever seen from a tackle. Teron Armstead has that type of potential. The only question with Armstead has been health. He's been on and off the field these last couple of years. But with a new coach, it's not a new regime, but will a new coach come in and say, Austin Jackson experiment, first round pick 2 years ago, we've already kicked him into guard. We're not going to put him back at tackle. Liam Eichenberg is probably a guard who was forced to play tackle. Let's just get Teron Armstead. That's our starting point. We're going to throw the money at him at left tackle, and then we'll find ways to improve across the other spots as well.
It definitely could be. I mean, that's a guy who has been, when he's healthy, one of the best tackles in the entire NFL. I would potentially look to maybe a shorter term solution at left tackle and just try and solidify the entire group. So the thing I love about this group in free agency is, I think in the mid tier, in the second tier, the lower down deals, there's a bunch of ready-made starters that might not be great, but are viable and won't destroy, won't be the weak link in your offensive line. So Miami could easily come out of this free agency with like 3 of those guys, a Connor Williams, a James Daniels, a Ben Jones, an Austin Corbett, Andrew Norwell, Alex Kappa, like Brian Allen. There's so many of these guys, and Miami should realistically rebuild the entire interior based off free agency. Like I think Robert Hunt can be a viable, decent starter that they already have intact. He's got the position flexibility to play right tackle as well. But I think you can rebuild like the majority of the offensive line in free agency, and then maybe the draft becomes everything about a tackle, or a guy that's a sort of short-term option in free agency that you could bring in and wouldn't break the bank is Dwayne Brown, who looks like he's reached that point of age and his career where he's declining. He had his worst PFF grade, I think, since his rookie year or his sophomore year. But he would still be like a decent caliber starting left tackle. If you bring in Dwayne Brown as like a stopgap, plow all the real resources into the rest of the positions, and then sort of see where you land in the draft, I think that would be a decent spot for Miami. Yeah,
the Dolphins. So you would go more stopgap left tackle rather than throw all the money at Armstead? As a general thought?
Armstead, I think, is risky enough because of his injury history that I wouldn't necessarily want to throw like all the resources at him, particularly given how much else you need to get done. And they're not, they don't have that sort of top 10 pick where the best left tackles in the rookie class are going to go. So I think you need to do something more moderate. Like, don't panic just because you need an entire offensive line and go, that means all the money needs to go at the best left tackle available.
The other name that could be exciting for the Dolphins, for a guard, Laken Tomlinson. He's number 26 on our board. Again, he's got that 49ers connection with Mike McDaniel. Tomlinson, slow start to his career, but he has really found a home in that Shanahan system. He's continued to get better, and he's above, Connor Williams and James Daniels, and I think that fit. Daniels is really intriguing to me because he's still so young and an excellent zone blocker. I think James Daniels or Laken Tomlinson would be an awesome fit here for the Dolphins. And this will be, again, we'll repeat ourselves sometimes, but for teams like the Dolphins, the Giants, the teams that really need to overhaul an offensive line, getting two, call them second-tier free agents and then sprinkling in draft picks and maybe a lower-tier free agent, I mean, you can do it, right? You can do what the Chargers did. They should be the prototype of a high-priced center, a low-priced guard, a first-round tackle, and then boom, all of a sudden, offensive line goes from one of the worst to at least middle of the pack in the NFL. So that's got to be the starting point here for the Dolphins. Anything else on the offensive line? I mean, this can't just be like the only thing that's attacked here for the Dolphins. They've done a great job building from back to front on the defense, but their defensive front played a lot better last year as well. Where else should they be looking to build around Tua and just rebuild this entire program?
Well, they need to keep attacking that wide receiver group or the receiving corps generally, right? They've got Jalen Waddle from last year. The noises they're making that the entire offense is going to run through Jalen Waddle. He's going to become their fulcrum in this group. They've been talking him up like Deebo Samuel, right? Just get the ball in the hands of your best playmakers. So Waddle will be that guy. Devontae Parker is still there. He brings something different, but that's basically it. That's the receiving corps right now. Mike Gesicki is going to hit free agency. He brings this interesting decision.
They have to bring him back, right?
Well, so the interesting thing, though, is what we've been talking about, that the wide receiver versus tight end franchise tag. It's like the tight end franchise tag number is such a bargain for NFL teams that you would think about franchise tagging a guy, a player of the quality of Mike Gesicki as a tight end because it's such a cheap deal that, like, hey, why not? But if you have to tag him as a wide receiver, it's not worth it because Gesicki isn't that good of a player. So Gesicki becomes this guy of the next Jimmy Graham, right? Is he a wide receiver or is he a tight end? And if you look at the difference between when Jimmy Graham had that argument about he should be treated as a wide receiver, all of the things that they sort of threw back at him of like X amount of snaps spent in line, a bunch of snaps when you were in the slot, it was essentially in line anyway because of how close you were to the tackle. None of that stuff really applies to Mike Gesicki. And if you look at how he was deployed, it is like 90+% as a wide receiver, not split out wide, but either wide or truly in the slot, not in the sort of attached slot, alignment as a tight end thing. So Gesicki has a genuine argument that he should be tagged as a wide receiver. And if the team tries to tag him as a tight end because it's so much less money, there will definitely be an appeal, and it'll be interesting to see sort of how that whole argument plays out. But yeah, if they can bring him back generally, sure. If they can bring him back franchise tagged as a tight end, it's a bargain. If you have to start treating him as a wide receiver, it gets like just exponentially more complicated.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we'll see what happens there, but I would love to see him back. They were the team that added Will Fuller last year, and we didn't get to see all of that. But the starting point of Devontae Parker, Jalen Waddle, and Mike Gesicki is a strong one. And then the theory of adding the speed receiver in Fuller was an awesome. I mean, that was great, man. I mean, that's how you attack defenses, right? Go ahead, try to cover this. So I'd love to see another speed receiver in there, not necessarily Fuller, who didn't, played a handful of snaps, but playmaker, definitely something that they need to take a look at. The other spot that probably needs to be addressed is edge rusher. So they used their first-round pick on one of their first-round picks on Jalen Phillips last year. Emmanuel Ogbah coming off a career year, he hits free agency. Andrew Van Ginkel on the other side, he's played pretty well. He's been solid, but probably another place that they could take a look at. They've got the pick at 29, and that could be there are some late first-round edges available. I mentioned David Ojabo from Michigan. He's 26 on the PFF draft board. You have Trayvon Walker out of Georgia, Jermaine Johnson out of Florida State. I think edge might be another place in this draft. That might be the sweet spot for edge rushers, is in that late first round for the Dolphins to take a look at. It is interesting that Xavier Howard and Byron Jones, they're both locked up. APYs of $15 and $16 million. Love that starting point at corner. Heard some rumblings that maybe one of those guys could be traded. You know, if you're the Dolphins, do you just sit and say, we've got cornerbacks 1 and 2 locked up for a few years? Yeah, there's a lot of money there, but that's fine. That is a great foundation for our secondary. Or would you tease potentially moving one of those guys?
Or Noah Igbenogany could easily be moved as well. Remember, this was the guy they drafted. The defense generally is going to be an interesting thing to watch, because Brian Flores was running this, Patriots family tree defense, which is at this point actually very unusual relative to how the rest of the NFL runs defenses in terms of scheme, in terms of how much man coverage they run, all these kinds of things. So Flores had done a pretty good job of recreating a New England defense, New England South in Miami. Now with the new regime, they're going to be running something quite radically different. And they have to, order of business number one for the defense is looking through that depth chart and saying which of these players fit in with what we want to do going forward. And are we as enamored with the idea of dumping $30+ million a year into one position group at corner? Is it as important for us as it was for this man coverage heavy system that Brian Flores and the Dolphins are running beforehand? And if it's not, what do we do with that? And as you said, trading one of those high price guys is one option. Trading a guy like Igbenogany, who was drafted to be part of that system, A, he might not fit with the new system. B, even if he does, he hasn't shown anything in the last couple of years to suggest that it's worth keeping him around anyway. And if he has some residual trade value, they might want to dump him as well. So generally speaking, I think that's going to be pretty interesting to see. Are there players available on that defense that they're willing to move or move on from, simply because the regime, the new scheme, is going to be so radically different from the old one?
Okay, then the other big question that we haven't even touched on yet. We're running the Dolphins. What are we doing with Tua?
I mean, yeah, you keep him, because
he's got one more,
like it was.
He's got one more year, right? Like at least one more year to prove. Not that is he a low end starter? Probably, yeah. But there's a bunch of those guys, right? So prove that you are the guy that we're going to build around.
You keep him at this point because there's not going to be a compelling option that's way better. Like, this is not a situation that we've talked about before, where, do you move on from a guy really quickly because all of a sudden you're presented with this potentially much better option, right? It's not a Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray kind of scenario. The Dolphins aren't sitting there with, the top pick in the draft, and they have this tantalizing quarterback prospect available, and you're like, oh, I don't know if we want to dump Tua for this guy. Like, because of the trade they made, their first pick is 29 in the draft. So maybe they get an option at one of these quarterbacks in the first round that's slipping to the bottom because the group of prospects isn't that good. And in free agency, it's not a great group of quarterbacks. Like, sure, if somebody wanted to drop Aaron Rodgers in their lap and say, hey, do you want this guy? All right, that's a discussion worth having. And they're the team that keeps getting linked for the Deshaun Watson deal. My take on the Deshaun Watson deal is the same as it was 9 months ago, whenever this stuff first started, which is, as long as that dude has 22 civil lawsuits and 10 criminal accusations hanging over his head, there is not a trade that is happening in the NFL. No NFL team can possibly sign on with, because the possible range of outcomes here is nothing. He gets proved innocent on all charges. Or perhaps more likely, they settle all charges, and he ends up walking away from this with literally zero consequences other than like reputational damage, all the way to like significant jail time, right? The dude's facing 10 criminal charges and some pretty serious stuff. How can you possibly do a deal that spans that entire spectrum of outcomes, even if you were comfortable taking on that character and that a guy who had been proven innocent of all of these accusations. So to me, no trade is happening until all that works out, and there is no sign of that being worked out anytime soon. So the Deshaun Watson, that's my take on that. That's my take that will, for every single team that comes up for Deshaun Watson, it's not happening until this all disappears.
So it's going to be Tua. We give him another year. We put the offensive line pieces in front of him, which, by the way, just to recap, I think what we could do on the offensive line, I would go Laken Tomlinson, free agency, Ben Jones, starting. So you have a starting center and a starting guard. Then if you look at the PFF free agent board over at PFF.com, in the 150s, you've got David Quessenberry, Mike Remmers, Dennis Kelly. Get me a Dennis Kelly as an insurance, maybe a low end but starting caliber right tackle. And so I'm overhauling this entire thing. Robert Hunt stays there because he's a playmaker, Sam. He's a playmaker. You put the ball in Robert Hunt's hands and good things happen. And then the other place you're opened up is left tackle, maybe at the back end of the first round. So I already mentioned some of the edge defenders, but Bernard Ryman from Central Michigan, I don't know if he's going to be available there. Trevor Penning from Northern Iowa, but there are potential tackles to be had maybe at the bottom end of the first round. But if you set that foundation in free agency with at least 3 players, 2 starters, a potential starter in a Dennis Kelly, the Dolphins should be looking to do this. The Giants should be looking to do this. The Bears should be thinking about this. The teams that need overhauls could do it in free agency, and I think that'd be a great starting point for this Dolphins team. And then back to the Tua thing, give him a year with Mike McDaniel. Let's see if Mike McDaniel can continue to elevate him. If he puts together, Jimmy Garoppolo was QB 13 in 2019, 77 PFF grade. Could Tua do that? Absolutely. And then, but then you just build everything around him and see what you can do there. So deep threats, offensive line's got to be priority number 1. I think defensive line depth for the Dolphins, and they probably need another guy at safety. But overall, it's not a bad roster, right? They've won a decent number of games these last couple of years, and they have done a good job taking this team from a team that looked like they were tanking in 2019 to a team that's been on the cusp of the playoffs these last 2 years.
Yeah, the problem they have is that the defense, we don't really know how much work it's going to need until they figure out what they're planning on doing.
True.
Relative to all these guys and the fit and the scheme. So we know that they have a massive hole in the offensive line and basically need to replace everybody there except Robert Hunt. We know that they have weaknesses at the receiving core, where right now it's basically Jalen Waddle and Devontae Parker, and we know they don't really know if they have a quarterback yet because Tua has been dealing with all of these problems for the last couple of years. And also, people are going to say they need a running back. And look, Myles Gaskin may not be great, but Myles Gaskin, remember, all the things we've been talking about with this offensive line impact Myles Gaskin and the running game as well. They have had the worst offensive line in the NFL in front of them, blocking for them. So I think the running game looks immeasurably better the second you fix the offensive line, and maybe you can deal with running back down the line. But I think a complete overhaul, they just need to hammer the offensive line with everything they have this offseason and then figure out some depth players to bring in a wide receiver to complement the fact that everything's going to run through Jalen Waddle. If they can bring back Mike Gesicki on a relatively cheap deal, fantastic. If they need to go into the marketplace and bring wide receiver help, then go for it. And a guy like maybe Juju Smith-Schuster is a pretty decent number 2 option if you've got guys like Jalen Waddle being the guy that the entire offense functions through. I think there are players available in free agency that could come and complement that pretty well.
If we're going to look at running backs, okay, Raheem Mostert, again, making that 49ers connection in the Shanahan system where you have a lot of plays where it's just well blocked up. Give me the speed guy like a Mostert that could create big plays coming off injury. Or Rashad Penny could be an intriguing one if he's not going to break the bank. I'm not sure if the NFL's buying into his 6 or 7 game run here, but Rashad Penny could be one of those guys that'd be a really nice fit because he started to look like the first rounder that he was drafted to be, creating just a big play threat, man. And I think that would fit well with what the Dolphins presumably want to do offensively.
Yeah, or it's the kind of position where you can grab a running back in the 5th round every year that plugs into that Shanahan style of offense and But if they fix the offensive line, like Shanahan's offense is like a walking example of how you treat the running back position, at least in terms of results, not necessarily in terms of process, because for some weird reason, they always do seem to actually prioritize throwing some resources at it.
Right.
But it's always the guy that doesn't have any resources attached to it that ends up having the success within that offense. So that's why I think just grab a guy in the 5th round and roll.
All right, Patriots are up next. But first, Hoops fans, the latest offer from DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. It's too good to pass up. We're talking between the legs, 360 windmill good. Better than the slam dunk contest the other night. New customers can bet just $1 on any team and get $150 in free bets if they win. It's that simple. If Sportsbook isn't yet available in your state, you can still take your shot at a big payday. Everyone can play for huge cash prizes with DraftKings daily fantasy basketball contests. And DraftKings is giving all new customers a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes with their first deposit. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PFF. Bet just $1 on any NBA team and get $150 in free bets if they win. It's promo code PFF at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. You have to be 21 or older. Minimum age and location requirements vary by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for full list of requirements and state-specific responsible gaming resources. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, the Patriots up next on our Fixing Every Team in 5 minutes. It's a little more than 5 minutes, but we're still fixing your team. With New England, they made the playoffs this year, bounced back from a disappointing 2020, seemingly got the franchise back, back on track. Last year at this time, we had no idea that they were going to spend as much money as they did in free agency, but they did. It was completely against previous New England Patriots nature. But I think they did it not because Nick Caserio controlled the credit card and finally Bill Belichick was free. That might have been part of it. But they did this strategically because we always talk about if you have a first contract quarterback, you get to spend money, right? You get to do other stuff. And I think the Patriots realized they had that opportunity. So they spent a ton of money last year. It's not really going to hamstring them this year. The biggest question, I think, is always going to start with now getting Mac Jones weapons. Is it wide receiver one as far as their biggest question mark, their biggest need this offseason? And will this be another year where things go a little bit different than the way they have previously in New England? We haven't seen Bill Belichick go take the top receiver on the free agent market and get him. He's made shrewd trades through the years, gotten a Randy Moss or given up a first-round pick for a Brandon Cooks. But is this the year they go get a Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson and spend a ton of money on a top receiver?
Yeah, they become that team that we've been talking about before, which is like, what does this offense look like with a true number one wide receiver in it? It becomes the new Baltimore. We were saying for a while that Baltimore runs a unique offense, and because of that, they have Lamar Jackson being the thing that makes the whole thing work, and then they have this group of receivers that are useful contributors, but there's no like dominant X wide receiver, no Julio Jones in his prime in there. And when the offense started to stagnate, it's like, is it the lack of one of those guys to really terrify a defense? And what happens if you put that in there? The Ravens still haven't really done that. They drafted Rashad Bateman. That's still a work in progress. He might become that guy, but he isn't right now. I think the Patriots are now looking at the same question, which is, we dumped a ton of money into tight ends last year, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. They have this group of receivers now that are capable, but nobody is terrifying you. Like Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, these are guys that, and Jacoby Myers when he was there. That's not a bad group. It's certainly better than the last year of Tom Brady and the Cam Newton year where they just didn't have anything. But it's still not like, hey, we have this scary group of wide receivers, and therefore we know that Mac Jones has everything to work for. I think you can still ask that question of, if we plug an elite number one in here, what does that do to this whole system?
Would you go that route with Allen Robinson or Chris Godwin? Godwin, the different style players, Allen Robinson probably more of a pure X, that guy that's going to win one-on-one on the outside. Godwin can do that, but he's also one of those high-volume slot receivers. Can be a vertical slot receiver. Can also win on the outside, but more of that Z move type of receiver. Do you spend that type of money on that guy? And then again, I keep coming back to, okay, where does everybody else land on the depth chart? They got a really nice season out of Kendrick Bourne. They could release Nelson Aguilar. I don't know if he'll be a part of the equation here going forward. Jacoby Myers as a possession type receiver. So you just have a much better wide receiver depth chart if you get that top guy, and it pushes everybody's role down a little bit. Then you do use those tight ends. You use Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, and you have so much more flexibility from a game plan standpoint. I'd be intrigued by at least an Allen Robinson, and I don't know if the Patriots go that route. Could also go back to the draft after picking N'Keal Harry with the only time they've used a first-round pick on a receiver in the Belichick era. So I don't know if they're going to be gun-shy there, but there is a lot of depth in this draft as well. Which would you go the draft route or think about that high-end free agent?
I mean, I just don't think they're going to go wide receiver in the draft. Like with the first round, again, given how badly the N'Keal Harry thing worked out. Like, this is not a team that had a history of picking in the first round, and then for some reason, Harry was the guy that tempted them back in there, and that has gone about as badly as it could possibly have gone. So at that point, I think we're not going to see Belichick draft the first round wide receiver again, ever. He's just done with it. The Allen Robinson thing is really interesting because I have a real feeling that Robinson is going to get absolutely screwed this offseason by just timing his one bad year badly. This is a guy who, dating back to high school, has been absolutely screwed by his quarterbacks at every single stage, including, the drink Christian Hackenberg. The freshman year that Christian Hackenberg's entire reputation was built on was basically Allen Robinson mossing people at the catch point every single time the ball showed up in his general vicinity. He's made, Blake Bortles look good. He's made Chicago quarterbacks look good. He's been successful with everybody. And then this year, the Justin Fields, Andy Dalton thing, whatever reason, Robinson just didn't have a good year. And now he's hitting free agency. He's starting to get on in age. He's not over 30 or anything terrifying, but we've seen a lot of his career already. And I just wonder if he's going to get the kind of market that he deserves based off the play we've seen from him in the past. So all of a sudden, I think Allen Robinson could actually end up being a value pickup for somebody. And maybe the Patriots are a team that doesn't typically get into the top of the market wide receiver sweepstakes. But if Robinson suddenly starts to provide a value looking contract, the Patriots actually could end up getting a steal and snagging him for a deal that's relatively cheap given how good he is, and actually get that number one wide receiver sort of unexpectedly.
And that's usually how New England operates. They're middle of the pack as far as effective cap space goes. So I don't think we're going to see the same $500 million thrown at free agents this offseason. So they might have to be more on the shrewd side the way they have been before. I think they just played the market based off of where they are. At the time, they had Cam Newton essentially on a first contract type of deal, that level. And then they have Mac Jones now, again, first contract type of deal. So they had more money to spend, but they spent a lot of it last offseason. So that'll be interesting to see if they do tease the top receiver, part of the receiver market. Michael Gallup is number 28 on our list. Does he end up? And again, I think Gallup is kind of like Corey Davis last year at this point. A number two, a good number two. But is a good number two going to make $12 million a year? I mean, I don't think that would be worth it for Michael Gallup. I wouldn't want to be the team that pays that type of money for Michael Gallup, who I love as a player. But if he's valued less than that, is that sufficient if you're New England? You have a Michael Gallup, you have a Kendrick Bourne, you have Jacoby Myers and the two tight ends, and now you're fine. Or do you really need the true game changer? If they do go in the draft, these guys could drop down. Drake London from USC moved to number 1 on our board. You've got the 2 Ohio State kids, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Treylon Burks could be there at the end of the first round. I mean, if they do go Jameson Williams as a speed threat, I agree with you. I don't think they'll go that route, but I do think they'll have some options there. But there is some good day 2 depth there as well at receiver. But I think even though it's never been in New England's nature to like really emphasize the receiver position, you're now in the Mac Jones window. How are we going to maximize Mac Jones' window? And I think you have to do it with playmakers.
And I'm not saying they won't draft a wide receiver, period. I just don't think they're ever going to do it in the first round again. Yeah. So all of a sudden you start to look at these sort of second tier type guys in the draft, and they become, I think, real options for New England, whether it's guys like Jalen Tolbert from South Alabama or George Pickens from Georgia. Like, these are guys that have elite ability, but they're a gap. They're not where those top guys are. So potentially if those guys are available lower down the draft, then the Patriots get interested or get involved. I just don't think you're going to see them like make the first round pick again on a receiver.
So the other place, if you're just looking at their depth chart where the massive needs are, their entire linebacking core, essentially hitting free agency, Juwan Bentley, Dante Hightower, Jamie Collins. So they need linebackers here in New England. We'll see if I don't know if Hightower is mulling retirement at this point. He had a pretty steep drop-off last year. So linebacker, definitely something that needs to be addressed. Free safety, Devin McCourty. He's getting up there in age, hitting free agency. And then the big one, their biggest free agent is J.C. Jackson at corner. And now we have a cornerback room that Belichick runs the Belichick type of scheme. They run man coverage. Corners are more important in New England than anywhere else. No more Stephon Gilmore. J.C. Jackson hits free agency. Does New England make him... there's Stephon Gilmore. They were paying Stephon Gilmore about $14 million a year because they identified, hey, we need that cornerback one to be able to play this man coverage, to be able to play game plan specific type of matchups. J.C. Jackson's been an absolute ball hawk for them. If he walks and they don't re-sign him, I love talking wide receiver one and maximizing Mac Jones, but this secondary becomes the biggest priority in New England, and I think they really need to look at signing J.C. Jackson long term because I don't love the other options behind him.
Yeah, I think they have to keep him around, whether it's a long-term deal or the franchise tag. That's one of those situations where you look at it and you say, okay, if we let him walk, what do we do then to replace it, right? Because as you said, you let Stephon Gilmore go because J.C. Jackson was waiting in the wings to basically be Stephon Gilmore in this defense. You need that. You need a high-end cornerback, at least one of them, for this whole thing to function. So if you're going to do the same thing with J.C. Jackson, where is the J.C. Jackson replacement? And it's not on the depth chart right now because the alternatives are like Jalen Mills, Justin Bethel, Sean Wade, like Joanne Williams. It's not there. So you're going to need to go find one, which means either you're spending your first pick in the draft on a corner and hoping that guy immediately is as good as J.C. Jackson, which, if you're picking 21 in the draft, that's probably not happening. I mean, just the way we see cornerbacks come into the NFL these days, it would be highly unlikely for you to hit on that. Or you turn to free agency, which means two things. One, you're going to be paying the kind of money you would have been paying to J.C. Jackson anyway to replace him. And two, like, he's the best corner available in free agency anyway. So right. You're taking a step down and probably paying more to get the same thing. So sometimes you can see an argument for not paying a player when there's an obvious alternate route that makes it either cheaper or easier to get that guy. But you look at the Patriots and you're like, if you don't have J.C. Jackson, it's either going to cost you more to replace him, or you're going to get massively worse. So just pay the man, right? If you need to franchise tag him, but they cannot let J.C. Jackson walk.
Yeah, I would say out of the corners, so J.C. Jackson's number 6 on our cornerback board in free agency. Stephon Gilmore's second at 15, so I assume he's not going back to New England. The only guys that I'm looking at that truly have the size and press coverage ability that New England covets, you have Carlton Davis at 16. He's played mostly in a zone system, but he's just a huge corner that can beat up receivers at the line of scrimmage who, might be able to stand to play a little bit more man. And then Travarius Ward is the guy, 47 overall. He's from the Chiefs, and I think he's got the size and the press coverage ability to maybe fit New England. Everyone else beyond that, there's a whole bunch of slot corners, undersized zone type of corners. and then just older guys like Patrick Peterson or Joe Hayden in this free agent list. So if we're talking free agency, it's really, to me, for New England, J.C. Jackson, Carlton Davis, or Trevarius Ward. If you want a number one-ish corner, and I think Ward is really a 2, so those are the fits. You could go the draft route, but I think it's just risky, I think, for New England to let J.C. Jackson hit free agency. So I think that should be the number one priority, because even if J.C. Jackson's there, you mentioned Jalen Mills, Jonathan Jones heading into his last year of his contract, they still need more depth there in the secondary. And then on top of that, do they bring Devin McCourty back for a year or two to finish his career? Safety might be another place. They do have Kyle Duggar. They do have Adrian Phillips back, but they love to play 3 safeties and have that depth. So that's another place that they might need to look at, either, probably another Adrian Phillips type, right? Another mid-level free agent that they just develop into a useful player. So secondary is definitely something New England needs to address.
Yeah. The defense is reaching a point where they got some turnover now. And it's interesting because a linebacker in particular, the 2 guys they have hitting free agency, like the 2 starters, Hightower and Bentley, those are weird body types and weird styles of player for the NFL in 2022, right? Dante Hightower and Juwan Bentley, they're both that big, thumping, run-stuffing type of linebacker. And do they pivot? Do they go in a different direction at linebacker now that those guys are potentially hitting free agency? Just generally what they're planning on doing at linebacker is going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, Hightower is right there with like Anthony Barr on our free agent list. Is Anthony Barr a type? One of those, they could use him in that Hightower-ish type of role where he's a blitzer, take advantage of that skill set, because Barr was a pretty good edge rusher in college. But they do have a lot of question marks as far as linebacker, what they're going to do at corner. As far as the rest of the roster, we talked receiver a little bit. Offensive line loses Ted Karras. They have enough depth to be able to handle that. Running back has great depth. Defensive line, they've done a pretty good job. They've got edge rushers with Matthew Judon, with Josh Uche, Kyle Van Noy that they use as a hybrid player. I mean, to me, it's really corner, linebacker, and receiver that are going to be the huge question marks. And I think, I don't want to use the word splash, but they need an impact top corner, they need an impact top receiver, and they have to fill out that linebacker depth chart, however they're going to end up doing that. So as far as fixing them, I know we've talked to Allen Robinson. I'd be intrigued by a Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin could be that 110 catch type of player for this team if they can get him at the right price, in free agency. Bring back J.C. Jackson, whether it's franchise tag or locking him up long term. Look to another corner. And I'm not spending a ton of time remaking this linebacker depth chart. I think that's a little, maybe try to bring Bentley back on the cheap if he doesn't have a big market because he is so unique to your style. But probably look to the draft to just round out your front 7 a little bit.
Yep, I think that's fair.
Is that getting the Patriots over the hump? To win a playoff game?
Maybe not, but it puts them in contention again. Like the thing that gets them over the hump is whether Mac Jones develops in year 2 and becomes, where his ceiling is, right? We know that Mac Jones was the best of the rookie quarterbacks, that Mac Jones looked really good for a rookie. Now the thing is to take away for the rookie, caveat. He needs to just be very good next year, period. And the thing that's still, I think, up in the air with Mac Jones is where is his ceiling? So give him some receivers to play with, make sure he's got enough open guys at all times, make sure the defense is able to be a really good unit, and then, the overall team is contending. And then the thing that gets you over the hump is if Mac Jones actually becomes that guy.
It's a big day today. The PFF QB Annual is live. One of my favorite things that we put out, not just because it was one of my ideas a few years ago, but because the execution on it is awesome. You will not find data like this anywhere else, and all packed into a beautiful PDF. It's all over at pff.com, and we're going to give you 25% off your Edge or Elite subscription, because that's where you get your QB Annual. 25% off using the promo code NFL Pod. So right now you've got the QB Annual live. You have the Draft Guide, which is live. We've got the completely unlocked mock draft simulator when you sign up, all of our free agent rankings, all of the locked content. Get 25% off all of that great stuff using the promo code NFLPod. I think it's worth it just for the QB annual today, but obviously you're getting more than that, 365 days of access to everything over at PFF.com. So go sign up for Edge or Elite. Use that promo code NFLPod. All right, let's go to the New York Jets. We're going to fix the Jets to round out the AFC East here. Another team, they got to figure out how are we going to best build around Zach Wilson. I think they're a team where you might say something similar that you would with the Patriots. Hey, a true wide receiver one would be great, but yeah, they just spent a lot of money on Corey Davis last year. They do have the 4th and 10th pick. There's a lot of people giving them receivers at pick number 10 in the draft. I think that could be a nice place for Drake London, the receiver out of USC. When we look at the depth chart, we see a pretty weak group of corners that absolutely needs to be addressed. But as we've said other times on this show, Robert Saleh truly believes in starting from that defensive line. So I think that's the place they will attack to try to find another pass rusher next to Carl Lawson. But the Jets have a lot of holes here. Sam, where are you starting when we're looking at this Jets roster?
Yeah, they have a lot of holes, but I actually think they could be okay quickly. I think you can patch this together reasonably fast. You're getting Carl Lawson back, so that's another one of those. It's like a free addition this year, right? You suffered through last season with Carl Lawson missing the entire year. Your big free agency signing. Now you get the benefits of it, though. You get like a bonus player that comes back this year that you're not investing in this offseason. So Carl Lawson with John Franklin Myers all of a sudden I think is a pretty useful duo up front. You definitely still need some help in the interior. Quinnen Williams, I think, is a good player. Maybe isn't going to be special the way we thought he might be. But either way, he needs a little bit of help around him. Presumably they're going to let Fatukasi hit free agency. Given the style of player he is, his market might not be huge. I would certainly bring him back if the price is low enough, because there's value in that kind of dominant run stuff, or even if he doesn't offer much as a pass rusher. To me, you just need to hammer the entire secondary. Like, you played all these guys last year, these 5th rounders and below, these young guys, and maybe you got a couple of guys who look like they could be part of a depth chart going forward. Bryce Hall certainly showed some flashes, but you don't want them all. Like, you don't want to do the same thing next year, right? You actually want to add some guys that can be legitimate number 1, number 2 type players and sort of patch together the rest around them. So I think cornerback really should be their number 1 priority. And, if we assume that J.C. Jackson is not going to hit the open market because of all the things we talked about with New England, they should absolutely be in the market for a guy like Carlton Davis and try and get, a one really good high-end starter and nail that down for this defense. They should probably also be in the market for a cornerback in the draft as well. And I wouldn't be at all against them double dipping and grabbing a corner in free agency and the draft. And at number 4, maybe they're the team that grabs a Derek Stingley or a Kyle Hamilton, like at safety. Like, maybe we've been saying before, look, as long as pass play is going to be this valuable and this important in the NFL, they should be worth picking at number 4. Like, stop just grabbing tackles and defensive linemen in those top 5 positions when quarterbacks aren't there. That's the kind of spot where an elite corner or an elite safety prospect should be going.
Oh, man, I'm with you on Stingley, man. I think he should be in play at 4. But that's me. Again, I said this a couple shows ago. That's me without skin in the game, right? Like, without being in the Jets' war room, without the risk factor. There is risk because drafting corners is risky, drafting corners whose play has dropped off and also who had injuries. But the payoff of a Derek Stingley in this system, man, he is your dude that's going to – he locks up the solo receiver, right? I mean, he could be absolutely incredible. I don't know if the Jets go that route. Completely with you as far as double dipping too. Bryce Hall, I think, could be a nice, a decent number 2 cornerback option. Give him a number 1 that's ahead of him. But the entire secondary, I think, does need to be addressed with the safeties, as you mentioned, both hitting free agency as well. Kyle Hamilton, there's risk there too, bringing in a safety who has all the skills, can do great things, but you have to deploy him in a way that's going to maximize value. So I get if you're in the top 5 and you're shying away from a Derek Stingley or a Kyle Hamilton, I kind of get it because of the risk factor, because of the positional risk factor. But I think that would be intriguing for the Jets. Knowing that they're probably going to look at a Kayvon Thibodeau, they're probably going to look at that defensive line opposite Carl Lawson, but I think you're hitting a home run if you hit on a Stingley or hit on a Hamilton. Either way, it does need to be addressed. I think Carlton Davis could be a good fit, like you said, as far as free agency goes. Casey Hayward, this is still that derivative of the Seattle scheme here with Saleh. Do you get Casey Hayward for a year? Just as a bridge at corner, because you do need so much other stuff. I think Hayward, you can get a good year out if he's 25th on our free agent board. So there are some players to be had here, I think, as far as corner goes. But I think they need to address it with multiple players.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's risk everywhere. Like the safe pick for the Jets would be either the offensive line or one of the edge rusher prospects. But it's not like that is a guarantee either. Like, even if they work out, you're saying, a Kayvon Thibodeau, the risk there is that you spent, a top 5 draft pick on a guy who is a complement to a Carl Lawson or a Franklin Myers, or maybe a guy that can replace them for cheaper down the road. And that's maybe a sidestep. It just doesn't do you much. Or you grab an offensive lineman who comes in and is maybe a marginal upgrade at right tackle for George Fant, who actually has played pretty well for the Jets. So again, it looks good. It's safe. It didn't cost you anything negative, but what's the payoff? The payoff for that is that you got marginally better or built a little bit of extra contingency at some positions that you were already kind of okay at. But the downside is that you took this opportunity to take a big leap forward in some direction and just didn't do anything with it.
Yeah, I think take some chances there. Plus, we always talk about winning the division, right? The Buffalo Bills are lining up with Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, with Gabriel Davis. You got to match up with those guys. You got to match up with the Patriots that we just fixed and gave them Chris Godwin or Allen Robinson. You got to match up with those teams, the Dolphins and their pretty good group of playmakers. So honestly, I think the Jets should be looking back to front as far as this defense goes. And what if they got Carlton Davis and Derek Stingley? Boom. How do you feel about that? That's what the Dolphins did. Not that the Dolphins are perfect, but they've created a much better pass defense by adding Byron Jones to Xavier Howard, right? That's where I think the Jets should be focused.
Yeah, and look, they also have a nice position of being able to have 2 first-round draft picks or 2 top 10 first-round draft picks. So, if you decide that a Kayvon Thibodeau is too good a value to pass up at number 4 and that he's the number 1 guy on your entire draft board, which is eminently possible, right? We're not that long ago from him being the presumptive number 1 overall pick. And now we're starting to hear more Aiden Hutchinson, more Evan Neal. All of a sudden, Thibodeau is getting pushed down a little bit. But it's entirely possible that a team like the Jets has Thibodeau as the number 1 player available in the draft, period, over everybody. And if he slips to number 4 and the Jets are like, well, we just got the best player in the draft at number 4, party time, fine. Then your number 10 pick starts to become cornerback. And maybe Stingley at that point is off the board, but maybe that is where, you can grab a guy like a Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, or maybe at that point you still go corner, or maybe if Stingley goes, maybe Kyle Hamilton lasts to number 10. There's a potential that either of the players we talked about are still there at number 10, or you're in that next group of players that are still potentially well worth that spot, whether it's Sauce Gardner, whether it's Trent McDuffie. There are going to be players available at that spot that can still do the job of double dipping at corner.
McDuffie might be my new favorite in the draft. I know I talked about him maybe falling to Buffalo. That's almost certainly not going to happen. He is just an incredible, smooth athlete. The comparison in our draft guide was Jair Alexander. If I could get Jair Alexander, not that we can make comparisons without equating, right, Sam?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But if I'm the Jets, McDuffie could be in play at 10. He's the best zone corner in this draft. They play a ton of zone. I think that could be a good fit as well. But the other place I'm going to be intrigued is receiver at 10. and we've seen a lot of people give the Jets Drake London, who is 10 on our draft board, big 6'5", agile monster as the number one potential receiver for Zach Wilson. What's the best fit at receiver here with Corey Davis and Elijah Moore already there? Denzel Mims still there, but maybe potentially on his way out. I'm more inclined to think that the Ohio State receivers who just get open a little bit more effectively, your Garrett Wilsons, your Chris Olaves, they might be a better fit for Zach Wilson, but also intrigued by Drake London. But you'd have to probably get London at 10.
Yeah. The other option, to me, you want something that is missing from the group as a collective. So you either want that guy who has that elite number one X wide receiver skill set, and that I think Drake London probably does fit that billing, or you want a guy that does something different to the others. And that would be a sort of designated speed threat to me. So a guy like Jameson Williams from Alabama who can take the top off a defense, a guy like Traylon Burks, who is like a supercharged physical specimen, someone that sort of brings something different to the guys that they have that can still make Corey Davis and Elijah Moore better just by virtue of the fact that now he's taken some attention either away from them completely because he's a better player or in a different direction because he's doing something different to those guys. Those are the sort of styles of receiver that I would want. So, a guy like a Garrett Wilson, maybe the best receiver in the draft, but I think stylistically that might not be the direction I would go if I was the Jets.
Is London the guy then? Because he's different from everybody.
Sure. I mean, London would be one option. The guys I named, Jameson Williams, Traylon Burks would be guys I would be interested in that role.
Jameson Williams, pure deep threat that could definitely bring something different than Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. Different body, different type of speed, and all that stuff. So, anyway, receiver. This is where the Jets are, right? They probably do need another edge. Definitely need a corner. Definitely could use another receiver. They've got picks 4 and 10. I think those are the places you're going to go with 2 of those picks, right? 2 of those premier type of positions. You mentioned a lot, too. People are mock drafting a lot of offensive linemen for them. They do have 2 starting positions, right guard and right tackle, that need to be replaced. You could have George Fant, who did take a step forward here when he played last year. Could have Fant at right tackle. I would try to bring back Morgan Moses, though. There's my first Morgan Moses mention. Bring him back at right tackle. And the offensive line is in much better shape than it was a couple years ago. If you listen to our podcast a couple years ago, we said, all right, spend some time on the line. A couple years from now, we'll get to the playmakers. And I think they're moving in the right direction there with the line being better, with Elijah Moore into the mix last year, Corey Davis into the mix, more work to do at receiver, tight end, another place that they need to look at as well. If one of the Mike Gesicki's of the world are probably going to go back. Dalton Schultz, if he doesn't get franchised by the Cowboys, I think would be an interesting one because you do want an inline tight end in this system, and Schultz works the middle of the field, another weapon there. The way he's developed in the pass game, I think I would keep an eye on Schultz. And the Jets have the money, right? They have the money to spend on a receiver, a tight end, a corner or 2, edge depth. They have the money, and I think they can make not a splash, but at least add 3 or 4 really good players in free agency. And I think Schultz at tight end could be another one I would take a look at.
Yeah, the tight end market in free agency is actually an interesting one. There's a bunch of guys that are potentially better, in a new environment, a change of scenery type of guy. There's, the likes of Evan Ingram or Mo Ali Cox are massively have huge potential that could be better players in a new team than they were with their old team. You also have the likes of like reclamation project type of guys. Like I would be massively intrigued by seeing OJ Howard in a new team. Like just didn't work in Tampa Bay at any point and looked like it was difficult to find reasons why it wasn't sometimes. Like he looked like he should have been better and just wasn't. I wonder if like OJ Howard in a new team looks like a different player, like just a ton of talent and never really worked with the Bucs.
OJ Howard's the guy when I'm putting the free agency rankings together, he's kind of making me mad because he's got 2 good seasons in small sample sizes out of 5 years. But to your point, if he's cheap, right? Like we ranked him 176th because there's just so much bad play on his tape. But if he's cheap, man, size and ability to work the seam and all that stuff and speed, and he's got it. So my other guy, Max Williams, man, I'd take Max Williams every single year. Could be the guy. He's coming off of his knee injury, but Max Williams could be a guy I think the Jets could take a look at as well. I want to see Max Williams, who's one of the best run-blocking tight ends in the NFL. I want to see him in more of a true three-down role because I think he could have, like Dalton Schultz kind of broke out as this really nice complementary weapon. Max Williams could have that type of season as well, maybe a little bit cheaper than Schultz as he hits free agency. So tight end definitely another place, man. It all comes down to getting Zach Wilson a whole bunch of weapons here. So we're going to go corner. We're going to go secondary first, edge second. Have we fixed the Jets? We had a lot of hypotheticals in here, but Carlton Davis in free agency I think could be a good play. If they end up going Thibodeau, look, I'm not going to hate on it. Thibodeau at edge at 4, and then at 10, come back with a receiver, and all of a sudden the Jets roster immediately looks so much better.
Yeah, I mean, at 10, I think your receiver or a corner again is in play at 10. And then, remember you're going to have more picks to address the one that you didn't take lower down and still be able to attack those positions. So I would love to see them between free agency and their first couple of picks in the draft emerge with at least 2 cornerbacks. Wide receiver, sure, add some, but I think that's lesser priority. Or at least, you can do that in a slightly different way. I just think you need to hammer that cornerback position multiple times. And if you end up using one of those picks on a Thibodeau because he's too good a value to pass up, I'm okay with that. But you need to make sure the second one, I think, is spent on that.
They also have picks 36 and 38. So, right. 4 picks in the top in the top 38. They're going to come away with some players. I mean, Jets fans are going to hopefully be pretty optimistic coming out of the draft, just with that level of draft capital and the money that they have to spend in free agency. So, huge.
And that's where I might hang on in terms of wide receiver and not use number 10 on one because, we're just seeing year on year the sheer volume of really good wide receivers coming into the NFL. And, maybe you use one of those picks on a wide receiver. Maybe you package them both, jump back into the bottom of the first round somewhere and snag one of these guys that's falling. I don't think you need to spend number 10 to get a high-end wide receiver.
All right, we're going to move to the AFC South now. And we're going to start, by the way, Jets fixed. The entire AFC East fixed, declared it. The Tennessee Titans. We're going to start with the Titans here, Sam, for fear of forgetting them. If we forget one of the 8 teams we're supposed to break down, then, that's on us. 1 of 32, it happens. But let's start with the Titans. How are we going to fix the Tennessee Titans? They are coming off a divisional round loss as the number 1 seed to the Cincinnati Bengals. The buzz in Nashville, is Ryan Tannehill good enough to win us a Super Bowl? They finally hit that point where they went from overachieving into the AFC Championship to now asking, is Ryan Tannehill the guy? And the people made sure to remind us to not forget the Titans. We're talking about them right now. Harold Landry hits free agency, so pure edge rushers, probably something to take a look at here for the Titans. Where are you starting in this Titans fix here, Sam?
Yeah, the edge rusher thing, I think it's probably the biggest issue for them. You spent the money on Bud Dupree. It was ill-advised at the time. It hasn't worked out well so far. If Harold Landry is on his way out the door, you just don't have edge rushers. You don't have guys that are going to generate consistent pressure year on year. You should have because you've invested in it, but you don't because you missed. Jeffrey Simmons is presumably on his way to a monster contract, but he's the one guy right now that's bringing consistent pressure up front. So I think you need to find pass rushers from somewhere, whether that's free agency or the draft. That, to me, would be number 1, the immediate starting point.
Yeah, so we mentioned a lot of the late first-round edge rushers that could be in play there for the Titans, the David Ajabus and Jermaine Johnsons of the world. What I'm intrigued with, so they also have 2 spots open on the offensive line. So Ben Jones at center, the guy that I keep sending him to a lot of teams too. Try to bring him back as a starting point. What I'm wondering, if you're the Titans, that we have multiple years now of seeing them as a much better run-blocking unit than pass-blocking unit. And as much as they want to run this offense through Derrick Henry, if I'm in the Titans front office, I'm asking the question, if we're going to win a Super Bowl, what's going to happen? And as always, I'm going to answer, the pass game's got to be better, right? The pass game has to be better. So do you make a move on the offensive line to improve in pass protection? Because, again, it's been a lopsided unit. They rank as one of the best run-blocking units the last couple of years, one of the worst pass-blocking units the last couple of years. It's just the way they've been built. It's just how the entire offensive line's constructed. Do we put more emphasis on the pass game and take a little pressure off Derrick Henry, as awesome as he is? And even though it's a little risky, too, to have games where you put the ball in Ryan Tannehill's hands, but we need to have that third and fourth option here. We need to have a tight end that he can trust. We need to have a third receiver to go with Julio Jones and A.J. Brown. And we also need to have a better pass-protecting offensive line so Tannehill's not getting sacked a ton, because he does tend to hold the ball a touch longer, very Joe Burrow-ish. Are we making that move? Can we make that move? Am I going to get laughed out of the building when the Titans hire me and say, we got to build around Ryan Tannehill, not Derrick Henry?
I'm just not sure what building around him looks like. Like, Ryan Tannehill has been really good in this offense when this offense is functioning. And that's not just a Derrick Henry thing. It's when the receivers are healthy, when the offensive line is playing well, when the play action game is strong. Like, that's when Ryan Tannehill posts a PFF grade as good as anybody. His efficiency is insane. His accuracy is good. He's capable of making big throws. Doesn't put the ball in harm's way that much. There's not much upgrading from that, in my opinion. Like, that's been shown to be a really successful strategy and something that functions. I think you're way better off trying to recreate that than you are trying to pivot in a completely different direction and hoping Tannehill is as good in a different system and a different set of circumstances, because that's kind of what you need in today's NFL. I just think make sure that offensive line doesn't fall apart. There's a couple of guys leaving potentially, whether you bring them back, whether you replace them, just make sure the line doesn't immediately collapse around them. Derrick Henry showed last year when he went down that he's not necessarily the entirety of the way this thing was built. Like, Dante Foreman came in, played well. The rushing production, at least, wasn't dramatically different. Now, you can argue that the impact on the passing game was significantly different, but the point is, Derrick Henry might not be the be-all and end-all of this offense the way it looked like he was. They definitely need to make sure there's more receiving options. The A.J. Brown, Julio Jones thing, Julio didn't stay healthy. A.J. Brown didn't stay healthy. Nick Westbrook-Akina was the sort of one player that was left over that actually made some plays and looked like he could be part of the future, but he's scheduled to hit free agency, so he might not be there either. You definitely just need to make sure that that doesn't happen again and you maintain some options. But I don't think you pivot in a completely different direction on offense.
So you're still building around this run game and play action. I think they need receiver insurance for Julio, right? I mean, the other thing, strategically, I'm also going into the building saying A.J. Brown's getting 15 targets a game. That's the bottom line. Get the ball into A.J. Brown's hands no matter what. Might need some Julio Jones insurance plus that receiver, that third receiver. Tight end's the other interesting one, too. A lot of the names I just mentioned, the Max Williams of the world, because you do have to run block in this system at tight end. But I think Max Williams could be a good fit. I don't know if like a Zach Ertz would fit here at his age at this point. But I think Max Williams would be intriguing there. I'm with you on I would bring back Ben Jones. Probably David Quessenberry, but still look. He's coming off a career year at right tackle, but still look for another right tackle either in the draft or some of the other Morgan Moses, perhaps, at right tackle, because, that's what you got to do. So you're just rolling with the same offense and just say, hey, we hope we catch a run here offensively.
Much. You're rebuilding it, right? You're attacking the areas that are getting weaker or potentially eroding, but it worked. Like, it's not something that I think that you need to dump the whole system and re-go like that. And also there's some players potentially, on the depth chart that could feature. Like Dylan Radunz was a high draft pick last year. Didn't really feature this season. Maybe he comes in and becomes part of that rebuilt offensive line. But one of my favorite player pick matchups in the entire draft so far is the idea of Treylon Burks to Tennessee, where they pick, where is it, 26, something like that, in the mid-20s. That, like, Treylon Burks is tailor-made for this offense. That guy is an A.J. Brown, Julio Jones clone in terms of just freakish physical ability. Maybe has some work to do in terms of route running and all that kind of stuff, but get the guy the ball in his hands and just watch special things happen. The Titans need some insurance in that area anyway. It's the kind of style of receiver that apparently they have a hankling for. Grab that. I love that fit.
He just fits the dudes, man. 6'3", 225. I like that. Get Treylon Burks in there. So let's do that in the first round for the Titans. So there's your Julio insurance plus, here, go cover these three dudes when we're out there. I would look at Max Williams at tight end in free agency. And now the edge rusher market. Are they going to just bring – so Harold Landry, intriguing. He did have a ton of sacks. He does bring a lot to this defense. He drops into coverage a lot. He's an Iron Man, plays over 1,000 snaps. Trying to replace that. But I do think they just need somebody that can win one-on-ones. I mean, they're really good at scheming it up front. As we saw, like the Joe Burrow game, that wasn't just domination up front. That was scheming up free rushers and stunts and twists and blitzes, and the Titans do a really good job of that. So maybe they don't need a guy that truly wins one-on-ones as much as some other teams, but Landry and Dupree are below the league average when it comes to just pass rush grade in general. So it is a place that they could upgrade. I wonder if like a Randy Gregory type in free agency too, a guy that could just get after the quarterback on third down one-on-one that doesn't need to be schemed up could be a good useful player there.
Gregory's a player that I really like in terms of fit for Tennessee. I think that would be a very good acquisition if they could get it done. I'm not sure what Harold Landry's market is in the NFL. He's a weird player to me because, typically the NFL pays for sacks, and we saw that with the Bud Dupree deal, and that's usually where they get themselves into trouble, and players that have a ton of pressure are usually better bets. Now, Harold Landry actually does have a ton of pressure, but it's not because he wins decisively and quickly and a lot of the time. It's because he plays almost all the time. And we heard Brad Spielberger talk about that. And there is value to that. Like there are teams that will covet that as a thing. Like, we don't need to take this guy off the field ever. That is a positive to have. And he does get pressure. It's just not necessarily decisive, early, high grading pressure. So I don't know where he lands in terms of the kind of contract that he would get in the NFL. Obviously, if it's massive money, the Titans should steer clear because the grade says he's just not worth it. But if the market isn't there because of those things, like we have him ranked 33rd on our free agent list, which is below guys like Hassan Reddick and Melvin Ingram, who was just a contributing part of that Chiefs team and the Steelers team this season. It's below Randy Gregory by some considerable distance. Like, maybe if his market isn't as strong as it could be, they have a chance of bringing him back. And if they can do that, sure. But it becomes interesting because if you can swap Harold Landry for Randy Gregory, I think you massively upgraded at edge rusher.
Yeah, they just might Gregory might not be that 3-down option. At least I just don't know if they would trust Gregory doing the same stuff that Landry did as far as dropping into coverage and everything. So it might take two, like, weird as it sounds, Landry has a 63 grade for us last year, but it might take two players to replace what they trusted him to do early downs and on third down. But I think edge is definitely something they're going to need to attack. More defensive line depth as well. And then in the secondary, on paper, it's really, really good. But Jack Rabbit Jenkins goes into his last season, Jack Rabbit, and then Caleb Farley, always some risk there with the injury last year. So maybe corner depth, something else they should take a look at. Low-end free agents, second-tier free agent types, just to add depth there, right? I mean, that because they dealt with it really well this year, but you don't always want to have to do that, right? So where
Caleb Farley thing is so tough because emotionally, you just want that guy to stay healthy and to pan out. You invested the pick in him. The guy has just insane physical tools. Like his upside or his skill set is so tantalizing in terms of what he could be that you are going to be so emotionally invested in him working out But it's like head versus heart. So your heart is going to be completely invested in him being the solution and being a really important part of your defense. But your head at this point, you're like, he was a risk coming out. He immediately got hurt significantly. And now you're like, this guy's got an extensive injury history. Can you trust him to be part of the future at all? Or should you immediately build in a contingency for the next time he gets hurt? And the head part of you should probably be looking at that and saying, yeah, it would be great if Caleb Farley worked out, but we should, at this point, the smart thing is to probably make sure that if he does get hurt again, we have a backup plan.
Yeah, so I think just adding depth there in general, maybe that's a place where Levi Wallace fits in. You know, again, I don't know where the market is for Levi Wallace, a Sidney Jones, but the guys that are in the 130s, 140s for us on our free agent board might be some really good depth for the Titans. I know you gave him Treylon Burks. I would be intrigued by Jamison Williams, the Bama receiver, coming off the ACL, just because of that pure speed threat next to A.J. Brown and Julio, at least for another year or two. So we'll see. But I think we fixed the Titans, Sam. We fixed the Titans. We added Treylon Burks, added some corner depth, added Randy Gregory, and they're back on track. They're going to get over the hump in the AFC. All right, who's next in the AFC South? We're going to go reverse alphabetical. So Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to fix this Jaguars team here, Sam. First order of business here in Jacksonville. We need receivers, we need offensive line, and we need defense. That's it.
That's it?
That's all we need.
Okay.
First off, Trevor's still the guy, right? We're not trading him? Number one overall?
I mean, he's still the guy, but you're a lot more worried about it than you were 12 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different. Him and Zach Wilson were equally unimpressive, right? But I'd be more worried about Zach Wilson than Trevor Lawrence, knowing how toxic this Jaguar situation was, knowing what we know coming out of there. It doesn't guarantee it's going to be less toxic going forward, but Doug Peterson comes in. He's going to take over the play calling. I think Peterson's a good offensive mind, former QB that's going to be right there developing Trevor Lawrence. I think they'll be okay. I want a big-bodied playmaker for him at receiver. I've always thought that Allen Robinson types would be a great for Trevor Lawrence. We'll see if Robinson would want to go back to a rebuild, go back to Jacksonville. But either way, a big-bodied receiver. And then they have 3 starting spots open on the offensive line. Left tackle, Cam Robinson. Left guard, Andrew Norwell. Right guard, A.J. Cann. All guys played, average football or so at best, but they're all hitting free agency in general.
Are you expecting Walker Little to step into that left tackle spot and be the guy going forward?
He could be. I don't think he's going to keep me from looking at other tackles, but I think given the other holes on the roster, I think you might have to. Little, a second-round pick last year, right? Was it second? He played okay in limited time, but you probably have to trust him at this point just because you have so many other places to address along this roster.
But again, they're another one of those teams where they're in a good spot in this free agency because of how many of those just decent, solid, capable starting guards there are available. So Jacksonville is another one of those teams that should just go in there, double dip on a couple of starting guards in free agency, hope that both of them pan out, work on the basis that if one of them pans out, we still upgraded one spot massively. But Alex Kappa, Brian Allen, Austin Corbett, James Daniels, these are all guys that could come in, immediately be capable. Start Mark Lewinsky. Like they should be grabbing 2 of those guys, plugging them in, and just forgetting about those spots for a while.
Ted Karras could be a really interesting option there. He's 133 on our free agent board, center and guard. I like a lot of those names you said. Like just fill out, I don't want to say fill out the roster, but fill out the offensive line with starters. And in both guard spots, as you mentioned, do need help. Tackle's a big issue, though, right? Cam Robinson has played below average football every year of his career, and last year was the best year of his career. He's still worth a negative WAR. Jawan Taylor, he's head into the last year of his contract. He's been just rough at right tackle. So you mentioned Walker Little might be able to fill one of those spots, but they do need to address tackle, which is why in the draft a lot of people are saying, hey, just take Evan Neal, take Charles Cross, whichever tackle you like at best at the top of that draft, take the tackle. For me, I think that number 1 pick, though, I'm leaning Aiden Hutchinson. I feel, and I think I'm overusing the word safe, but I would say that Hutchinson's projections are better, right? I feel better about Hutchinson, what he's going to do at the NFL level, than what I think Neal and Cross are going to do. Neal could be spectacular. He's working with Duke. He could do a jump split. He's got a lot of good stuff going for him. But I'm leaning toward Aiden Hutchinson as long as he doesn't screw up the workouts and we find out that secretly he's not a great athlete, even though he's a Feldman freak and does look like a really good athlete on the field. So I would lean Hutchinson, but then that brings up the question at left tackle. Are we trusting Walker Little, or do we go to free agency there as well? I mean, they could be a team that throws the money at Teron Armstead. But again, you mentioned the risk with the injuries and all that stuff too. That might not be the route for this rebuilding Jaguars team right now.
Yeah, it feels to me that because their entire future has to be, hey, let's make sure Trevor Lawrence is good.
Yeah,
they will default to getting in protection at the top of the draft, right? Because this is how the draft works now, that if there isn't a quarterback that goes top, we look at edge rusher and we look at tackle. For some reason, that's the two positions that the NFL has decided they go number one in years where the quarterback isn't going one. So the Jags are now looking at, is it Aiden Hutchinson, is it Kayvon Thibodeau, or is it one of these tackles, whether it's Evan Neal, Charles Cross, Ickey. Like, those are the guys that are basically on the table for that debate. And if you're the Jags, and Trevor Lawrence showed relatively little last year, the situation was a mess. Like, their entire approach has to be, let's make sure Trevor Lawrence does not suck year two. I think at that point, they will just spend number one on whichever their favorite tackle is, whether it's Evan Neal or one of those other two guys. To me, that's where they're going to go. And whether he plays left tackle or right tackle doesn't really matter in terms of they need both. So I think that's where they end up defaulting, even though when you look at sort of all the PFF data and the projections and, how good they've been relative to everything else, Hutchinson is probably the best pick they could make.
I mean, listen, let me talk myself into the Neal pick right here, right? Let's say you go the route that you said. At guard, they get James Daniels to start, and give me another starting guard in free agency. Ted Karras.
Kappa.
Who?
Alex Kappa.
Alex Kappa. So let's say we invest at guard. James Daniels, Alex Kappa, Brandon Linder's still there at center. You go Evan Neal at left tackle. All of a sudden, that's looking decent. Now, right tackle, I'll move Walker Little down over there maybe to compete with Juwan Taylor, who's in the last year of his contract and, again, has been well below average. That's not too bad. I think we've crept back toward average on that offensive line with a couple free agent investments and then Evan Neal solidifying. That's the thing. Like, when you draft a tackle, it's not about him in isolation. It's about him as a part of all these other pieces and, getting that hopefully trustworthy starter at number one. I could talk myself into that. And now we've got a foundation for Trevor Lawrence up front. And then on the turn, the Jags top of the second round here, then you could start looking at receivers, maybe corners, and there might be some value there. So, I mean, look, I could talk myself into the Neal pick, but it depends on, having a few pieces added in free agencies because you get that line back on track pretty quickly.
Yeah. We grabbed two right guards. Maybe Connor Williams is the guy instead of Alex Kappa. Give him a left guard.
Daniels can play anywhere though. He's played any guard spot.
You might as well go with guys that are either side rather than making them reshuffle.
The point is, I don't mind spending some money on guards, in this market with the money that you have, because there is a draftable commodity at tackle to kind of tie it all together and put him on a rookie deal. I'll tell you one of the receivers I love for Trevor Lawrence in the draft is George Pickens from Georgia. The more I watch Pickens, I made a Brandon Lloyd comp for him, which you might not completely agree with, but Mike Renner does, so that's all that matters. Again, for Lawrence, I want somebody that's going to bring out some aggressiveness in Trevor Lawrence. I think George Pickens just goes up, makes spectacular catches, goes and gets the ball. He could be available on day 2, and I think that would be a nice matchup with a nice pairing with Trevor Lawrence.
Are we going to get like the one good year from Brandon Lloyd, or are we going to get the rest of Brandon Lloyd's career?
We're going to get it could be that same level of inconsistency, not going to lie. Pickens has had some of that too, plus injuries.
That doesn't feel like a good thing.
Well, I mean, just the way he contorts his body and just goes up and gets it, and the potential to be a high-end Brandon Lloyd type of player. How about that? The good Brandon Lloyd. Okay. But either way, the receiving group right now, DJ Chark hits free agency, Marvin Jones getting old, Laviska Shenault, I think at this point, certainly a complimentary piece, not a number one. This group absolutely needs to be addressed. Where's the best place for the Jags to do it? I mean, with the money, do they go after one of those top free agents? I would think so.
Yeah, maybe, but it's like which one of those guys makes sense? Like it's a weird group of receivers available in free agency. Like Gallup would be an intriguing one for them because he's a sort of certainty, just a certain commodity of he's good, right? We know Michael Gallup is good. Not only is he good, but he's a sort of number 2 receiver that can win against number 1 corners, which is not that common like a thing. You don't find those players that often. Gallup could come in there, be your number 2, be able to line up outside against elite number 1 corners and still win when you need it. You still have Laviska Shenault that becomes your sort of slot and hybrid type of option. They're still getting Travis Etienne back that they never had for the entirety of the Urban Meyer regime. Like Urban Meyer drafts this guy, talks him up as this hybrid super weapon, and then never sees him play. So they're getting that guy back, which will be an interesting thing. And then they just need, at that point, you just need that one sort of missing piece of the receiving core. You need the elite number 1, or you need the superstar that can make spectacular catches or win deep. And that could be your George Pickens, or it could be one of these guys at the top of the second round. So
you're going to go Gallup? What if we go Gallup in free agency? What if we give them Marquez Valdes-Scantling too? He's
going to be your Will Fuller this year. Marquez Valdes-Scantling.
Yeah. Anybody who's fast.
Yeah.
Can be my guy.
John Ross still available?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, John Ross, I'm signing him every year. He won the game for the Giants against the Saints. He won a game. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what John Ross does. Loses games too, but he wins games. So you go Gallup, high volume receiver, Valdes-Scantling as your deep threat, then George Pickens in the draft, and boom, there we go. And the offensive line that we've already overhauled, there's the Jags offensively, right back on track. Right. Fixed offensively. Now to the defense. I was disappointed in their defensive line. If you look at the defensive line grades from Roy Robertson Harris to Malcolm Brown, Devon Hamilton, they added kind of these like mid-tier free agents, mid-round players, and just did not get great play up front from them. I thought process-wise last year it wasn't bad. The results were horrible. I mean, they just need everybody up front. And the other Josh Allen, he had a career year. He's hitting the last year of his contract. I don't know if he's worth a long-term deal at this point. He's been a little disappointing, I think, for the 7th overall pick in the draft. Kayvon Chason as an edge a couple years ago, we thought he was a risky pick because he wasn't all that productive at LSU, but had great traits. He's coming off a 47 grade, never really been an effective pass rusher. The entire front 7, to be honest. I mean, but across the board, especially on the defensive line and edge, really needs to be addressed.
I mean, I don't think you need to limit it to the front 7. Like the entire defense, top to bottom. They're the only proven commodity players they have are guys that didn't play well last year. So there's not a single untouchable member of this defense or a guy that you can look at and 100% guarantee will be a key contributor down the line. You would assume Miles Jack would, but he just had a disastrous year. Shaquille Griffin is the sort of big free agent spend from a year ago. Didn't have a particularly good year either. Tyson Campbell, a high draft pick, was okay, I guess, but year 2 was the important year for him. It's just there's very little here in terms of any kind of level of confidence that they will be good going forward. You need to just I mean, God, just hit it everywhere.
Just everything. So
Any
now
defensive
this is
players we are in.
We've already given Evan Neal at number 1 overall, but this is where if you have Hutchinson, okay, now we've got a good starting point for rebuilding this defense. You pair him with Josh Allen, at least in the first year, and you've got some depth there at edge. Takes a little pressure off Chason, who could take a step forward in year 3. Big body, the big body defensive lineman I think you try to find in the middle rounds. But, again, secondary with Shaquille Griffin's the only guy you could really depend on. You do need a Tyson Campbell could take it's a whole bunch of could take a step forward. But I think cornerback 2 plus the guy that's going to take over for Shaquille Griffin in the future is needed there. Maybe Carlton Davis is a guy you'd spend money for there as well. But again, there's few young corners to really build around when it comes to free agency. And that's why we brought up, hey, should Derek Stingley be on the table at number 1? Because if you're talking a long-term number 1 corner, who is it? J.C. Jackson and Carlton Davis as far as free agency goes? I mean, that's it. And maybe the draft is the place to do it. Yeah, I mean, every number 1 pick is going to be risky because it's a tackle, it's an edge, it's a non-quarterback, but maybe Stingley should be in play at number 1 because the Jags could use that as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you get teams where they draft at the top of the draft, and you're like, you know what, this team isn't actually as bad as that position. They only need a couple of things to be fixed. Okay, they're typically important things like quarterback, but once you fix those things, this team could be pretty good pretty quickly. The Jags are a team that belongs with the number 1 overall pick. Like, they are a bad roster in a lot of places, and it's going to take more than one offseason to fix the Jags.
I think a corner like Darius Williams from the Rams could be a nice option because, again, I think let's say you invest your resources in edge or tackle at number 1 overall, and if there's not a true number 1 corner, should they be in the J.C. Jackson sweepstakes? Probably. I also don't know if you want to spend that kind of money if you're the Jags at just one cornerback spot. You might want to stitch it together with Darius Williams. I think you want to find a player like a Darius Williams who's not a true number 1 corner, but is a long-term play, right? Can be there for multiple years. Not just, Travarius Ward, who I mentioned earlier with the Patriots. Maybe those types, younger type of corners that can be there for the next few years. I think we'll get to the Texans in a minute. The Texans used all the players they signed last year were guys who were on 1 or 2 year contracts or just weren't going to be there as part of the rebuild. Find the middle tier of free agent that is young enough to be there as part of the rebuild here for the Jaguars.
Yeah, I also think they're a team that could take some shots at some young guys that could potentially be better with a bigger role because God knows they have the snaps to give them if they are showing well. So a guy like Okoronkwo, with the Rams.
Love that.
Okoronkwo was a really productive situational pass rusher, but the Rams have a bunch of high-end players, and it's difficult to get that guy snaps on a Super Bowl winning roster, particularly when guys like Von Miller arrive midseason via trade. The Jags don't have anybody keeping him off the field, right? So if Okoronkwo comes in and the only people keeping him on the bench are, the busted draft picks essentially that they've had in terms of guys like Caleb Von Chason, there's literally no reason in the world that he can't start getting a massively scaled up workload. And, the better players are playing more because of it. So I think the Jags should be looking at free agency at basically every position and saying, who are some young players that have shown well in relatively limited snaps that within this defense could be better.
On the defense, I love that. Give me Okoronkwo in Jacksonville. So we fixed the offense. Add Okoronkwo at edge. Maybe a guy like Tim Settle, interior defensive lineman. Maurice Hurst. I would always take the shot on Hurst. But these guys that still have multiple years ahead of them that could pay off here for the Jaguars. So that's how we're going to put it all together on the defensive side of the ball. I would, Darius Williams at corner. Boom. Look at us. Fix the Jags. Are they fixed?
Ish.
As best we can. Yeah. All right, only 2 more teams, Sam. Gosh. We're going 2.5 hours on this thing, huh? It was going to be 5 minutes. Indianapolis Colts. What are we doing? What are we doing at quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing, right?
Let's have a meeting.
The Colts are already making
Put our heads together.
noises.
What do you do with Carson Wentz?
Look, if I can find a team willing to trade for Carson Wentz, I am all for getting rid of him. I just don't think that team is going to materialize, at which point your options are, do we keep him or do we cut him? And that becomes, I think, significantly more painful. So I think you kind of made your bet a year ago with the trade, and now you got to lie in it and try and make the best of the bad situation.
The Colts are always near the top as far as cap space goes. I mean, they're still 5th in effective cap space right now. And I think that's part of why they were able to make the Wentz deal, right? Like, we've got this money to spend. Even if it's not in a vacuum the wisest money, it's this necessary risk. And then even if we have to pay to get out of it, it was a necessary risk, and we have to move on. Maybe it's not going to hamstring them as far as, team building goes beyond that. I think no matter who the quarterback is, my broken record is, man, he needs better people to throw to. It was great to have Michael Pittman emerge last year, but they didn't do enough to maximize Carson Wentz anyway. So how do we want to move forward here? Are we stuck with him?
I think you're stuck with him. I mean, I don't, like I said, unless somebody's willing to trade for him. If you're telling me that there's a decent trade on the table, take it. If there isn't a decent trade on the table,
where are we replacing Wentz?
I think that becomes less of a problem if somebody's willing to give you something for him. My thing is, if nobody's willing to offer anything, I refuse to just cut bait on the first round pick that I haven't even given away yet.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to get rid of him, it's to try to just, it's because you don't believe in him.
Yeah.
Because it's not to save money. It's because you don't believe in him, and therefore you believe in someone else more. Do you believe in Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater? Do you believe in these guys more than Carson Wentz?
No. I mean, look, I can see an argument that you could cut Carson Wentz, sign Jameis Winston, and it would still be cheaper.
Sure.
Even with eating $15 million of dead money for Carson Wentz's deal. Like, what I'm saying is that Jameis Winston will sign a deal that costs less than the $13.3 million you would save from cutting Carson Wentz. I could be tempted to make that move. Like, even if a team won't trade for him, you cut him, you sign Jameis Winston for like a 1-year, $8 million deal, you might be better, and you're definitely cheaper.
Okay, so no matter who the quarterback is, because we could just move on from that position and say whether it is we've traded Wentz, we've replaced him with Jameis, we've replaced him with Mariota. No matter who it is, we have a mid-tier quarterback here in Indianapolis. Fair?
Yeah.
We have a middle-class quarterback here. Now, just cut all my analysis from last year. Just stitch it all in where I said the Colts have to flood the field with good receivers. You have to. And T.Y. Hilton's not only getting older, maybe mulling retirement, but a free agent. Zach Pascal, Mo Alley Cox at tight end, all free agents. Michael Pittman's the only one remaining. Again, this is where I think they failed. They just did not have enough dynamic playmakers, dudes who got open, guys that were going to elevate Carson Wentz because he needs to be elevated. So we're going to do that this offseason. Has to be the priority for the Colts. How are we going to do that with no first round pick?
I assume step one for you will be giving them Marquez Valdes-Scantling.
Wow, that's a good Valdes-Scantling would be a great option for the Colts. Need a deep threat here. Bring back Alshon Jeffrey for Carson Wentz. Bring them all. Bring back Nelson Aguilar. Bring them all back. All right, who's a better option I can give besides Valdes-Scantling? Should they be in the Allen Robinson market? Mike Williams.
Mike Williams would be an interesting one. Let's recreate the Chargers thing from years ago, right? Of just surrounding Carson Wentz with a bunch of 6'5" players that he can't possibly overthrow.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But that's what he needs, man. I mean, look, we might not replicate. This is why I'm saying this. We might not replicate 2017 Carson Wentz. But if you just go through all of Carson Wentz's seasons and say, what did he have each year? Most years of Wentz's career, he's had one of the best offensive lines in the league. Most valuable run blocking, pass blocking, all of it. He's had one of the best in the league. But he only had 1 year of exceptional production. And it was when all of his pass catchers were awesome. In part because, they work with him, but it was great. Alshon Jeffrey was fantastic. Nelson Aguilar was fantastic. Zach Ertz was great. Do you bring in Ertz? Old friend Ertz, as a pass catcher as well. They teased that last year as well. You can go Mike Williams. You can go Zach Ertz at tight end.
Yeah, I mean, one of their big problems is that they obviously traded away the first-round draft pick for Carson Wentz. So
right.
They're not going to have that first-rounder to attack the area's weakness. They've got to do the majority of the heavy lifting in free agency. And that's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. So you're going to have to attack multiple guys when it comes to wide receiver. I don't hate this is one spot that I don't actually hate, the Marquez Valdes-Scantling thing. I think actually makes a lot of sense, as does, by the way, Will Fuller. Not together, but one of the two makes a lot of sense. And I think Christian Kirk would be an interesting guy within this offense. Like, he showed this season that if you move him into the slot and use him the way the Cardinals did when they've got outside viable players, he can be a really productive third option. That would be an interesting guy, as would Jamison Crowder in that kind of role as well. Like, I think there are definitely players that the Colts can attack and try and assemble a receiving core along with Michael Pittman.
Does that look a lot like past years, though? Because we sat here with past years. It's like, well, it's T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman, if he takes a step forward, which he did, and Zach Pascal. And it's like, it's a pretty good receiving core. Some of their parts is good, but they need a guy. They need a guy, right? And they need a guy. Like, that's why I'm leaning toward a Mike Williams type. And he goes up and gets it. And, you also want that guy that's going to induce the aggressiveness out of the quarterback, right? And if you have to make tight window throws to Mike Williams, maybe that's pulling some of the aggressiveness out of Carson Wentz. Either way, it needs to be multiple players. I would bring back Mo Alley Cox as a nice complement to Jack Doyle. That looks like a pretty good tight end group when you have better receivers around them. But yeah, you can't trust Michael Strawn necessarily to break out, or Paris Campbell. You could get something out of them, but you don't rely on them. You just, if it's a bonus, but you have to invest in pass catchers here, because whether it's Wentz or Mariota or Jameis, we have a mid-tier quarterback. The other spots, there's two spots on the offensive line. Mark Lewinsky at right guard, left tackle Eric Fisher. The Chris Ballard was, I think, leaning toward not bringing Eric Fisher back, so they need a left tackle again. They evaluated the draft last year, didn't love any of the left tackles in the first round, went with edge Kwity Paye instead. So left tackle, a spot that needs to be looked at. So is this a Dwayne Brown situation where you get a year out of him?
I don't understand not bringing Eric Fisher back. To me, the signing last year doesn't make any sense unless you bring him back this year. Like, you signed him coming off an Achilles injury. It wasn't Achilles, right? You signed him coming off an Achilles injury in the AFC Championship game to play the following season. Of course he wasn't going to be good last year. Like, there was no way he was going to be back to his best. And let's face it, like, it's, Eric Fisher, with all due respect, it's not the best tackle in the world at his best. So the idea that he was going to be anywhere near at his best coming off an Achilles injury at almost the last possible moment in that season was kind of nuts. To me, the only way that made any sense is if it just sort of puts you in position to re-sign him longer term after that year, and then you get the best of Eric Fisher back again. You've suffered through like the bad Eric Fisher, and now a year removed from that injury, you should be getting something like the better version. And when you look at the other options available, like, unless you want to throw the bag at Teron Armstead, there aren't really that many options better than Eric Fisher. So just sign him.
Yeah, I mean, Quentin Nelson's contract's coming up as well. I don't know if I'm spending a ton of money. They've already spent a lot on Braden Smith. If you can get Eric Fisher somewhat cheap again, $8 to $10 million on a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, I think it's fine. I just don't know if they've soured on him because of the slow start coming off the Achilles.
But again, like, if they have, I don't understand your logic if that was the case.
I agree.
Why would you expect him to be great coming off an Achilles injury suffered in January?
I agree with you. So that's the offense. We've given you some options at receiver. Bring back Fisher. Find a guard somewhere. They're good enough everywhere else. I mean, try to bring back Lewinsky. I don't know what type of market he's going to have as a starting guard, but I think they'll be okay along the offensive line. Running backs obviously in good hands with Jonathan Taylor and Naheem Hines catching the ball out of the backfield. But man, surround Wentz with playmakers. Now defensively, Ballard also came out and said we're just not deep enough on the defensive line. And this is coming off of a couple of years of investment, man. It's coming off of a first-round pick and a lot of money for DeForest Buckner, a first-round pick on Kwity Paye, a second-round pick on Dayo Odeyingbo last year. So they've spent a lot of resource, essentially, on the defensive line, but a place that they're looking to upgrade because they're good. They're okay up front, but they don't have a killer pass rush, and I think that's what they're looking for here.
Yeah, and the good thing is, though, I think that they can attack it with depth. Like, I don't think they're a desperate team that needs to go hammering free agency or the draft for like elite starters. They've got Kwity Paye, who I think should be better next year and showed enough that you'd be intrigued by his potential year one. You've obviously got the big money move that you made with DeForest Buckner a couple of years ago. I think our high-end players are good. They just need to add some depth because basically, A, the depth they had hasn't really panned out, and B, a lot of it is hitting free agency, and they just need to turn it over.
Melvin Ingram's number 24 on our board overall as an edge. Could he be the hired gun for the Colts? Not that they're this lock playoff team, but I think he could be a good complementary piece to all those other guys that you mentioned. Charles Harris last year had a breakout season, the former first-round pick. I don't know if teams are going to trust him enough to have a long-term deal. Maybe you try to give him a prove-it, another deal just to get some more pass rush in there as well. But that's where I would explore in edge, as far as edge goes. That's what intrigues me about what Ballard's saying in this Colts offseason. I think there are other issues that need to be addressed. And I don't know if the resources are going to go to defensive line and left tackle when I think it just needs to go on the perimeter that's where you're going to take that biggest leap forward as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a far bigger issue than defensive line depth would be like who are your cornerbacks?
Yeah,
like at all. Xavier Rhodes is hitting free agency. Rocky Yassin isn't good. Kenny Moore is great, but he's your slot. Like that, he can't be your number one corner. So you need to come up with a solution as to who your two starting cornerbacks are. I think that's a far bigger issue than building in some defensive line depth behind the likes of Kwity Paye and DeForest Buckner.
I will say corner is probably a less important position for the Colts versus other teams with how much zone they play. But yeah, definitely someplace you would want to improve. I think DJ Reed maybe could be an intriguing option for them. The former Seahawk who just always played well, man. He could play cover 2, play cover 3, do a lot of the things that the Colts want to do there. Rasul Douglas could be a good fit there. Again, given all the zone that they play, the way Douglas can turn the ball over, that could be the other thing too. If you've got a mid-tier quarterback, right? Do you try to build this uber volatile defense where if you just hit the turnover luck the right way, you're putting your offense in better position to elevate them because they need it? Do you do that with Rasul Douglas? You already have Darius Leonard, forcing fumbles, Rasul Douglas jumping routes and everything. It's just another potential strategy here, when you're saddled with the middle-class type of quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, Douglas would be interesting given the season he's coming off and the defense that they play. And then Levi Wallace, I think, is another guy that would be perfectly made to fit within this defense that, plays that kind of cornerback-friendly type of system anyway. And Levi Wallace is a guy that's always overachieved relative to expectations. And because the expectations are so low, I think the price would be tiny for him.
They did bring in Gus Bradley to run the defense as well in Indy. So, I mean, there's not a more predictable coach than Bradley. It's not necessarily a knock. You just kind of know what he's going to play. So anytime Gus Bradley's around, Casey Hayward is in play as well. You could get another good year out of Casey Hayward there as well, playing in the system that he knows and has played well in pretty much every single year except one. So, yeah, I mean, let's wrap it up on the Colts here. Add some depth at edge, I think, in free agency. I think you can address corner the way that we just did. You can bring back Eric Fisher at left tackle, and I think you got to go all out at receiver. This is after we've sorted the Carson Wentz situation.
So what are we pivoting to Jameis? Is that what we're doing here?
If you tell me I could save money, I would pivot to Jameis. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you still have you maximize Jameis by giving him great dudes to throw to. And I know, again, that sounds like, oh, that's every single quarterback. Well, yeah, it is. But you can't not do that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't, just like I don't think the Colts could have pivoted to Wentz and not given him great receivers. Right? I mean, can you trade for Aaron Rodgers and not give him great receivers and still win? Sure. But I don't think you can do it with a Wentz or a Jameis. So you have to address both together.
Jameis Winston made $1.1 million in 2020. He made 5.8 in 2021 based largely off incentives. So I would imagine you can re-sign or you can sign Jameis Winston if you're a team for under $10 million. Carson Wentz, cutting him, you're going to have to eat $15 million of his guaranteed money, but cutting him would save you 13 point whatever I said it was, 4.
Is it worth trading Wentz plus a draft pick to see if somebody will eat the cap space, that old Brock Osweiler deal?
Ooh. I mean, again, if you can convince a team,
I don't know who does that though, because he's
to trade for Carson Wentz, I will listen to any offer on the table.
He's still a starting caliber quarterback though, and like the first team that has the most effective cap space that needs a quarterback is the Broncos. So would you, like, if the Broncos miss out on Rodgers, could you convince them to take a pick and Wentz, and they have a starter, and they're very unexcited about it, but they have a starter, but they get an extra draft pick because they're in year 2 of their build, right? New coach and the whole thing.
What would the pick have to be?
That's the tricky part because they don't have the Colts don't have a first, and if you're going to give up you can't give up a second.
Right.
Osweiler was a second
Wentz?
in like $18 million.
No, it's not happening.
All right, so it's not happening. So it's Carson Wentz and just load up with playmakers here. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, NFL Pod, 25% off all of our great stuff over at PFF.com. Every single subscription using the promo code NFL Pod. Get your QB annual today. All right, let's wrap it up. Houston Texans, man. What are we doing? How hard could it be?
Very hard to fix the Houston Texans in an offseason. Yeah, good luck with that. They need everything.
The rumors are already out there that there will be 3 massive trades with the Texans, starting with Deshaun Watson, followed by Laramie Tunsil, their starting left tackle, and then receiver Brandon Cooks. So the 3 assets that the Texans have, almost certainly going to be traded. When I look at their roster right now, I think it's the only way. You have to. You have to trade whatever assets you have left. I think that's just where they are.
I mean, look, yeah, if you can, trading Laramie Tunsil, fine. Trading Brandon Cooks, okay. I see my earlier statement for trading Deshaun Watson. That's just not happening until his legal stuff gets worked out. So what you're telling me is you've traded away your 2 good players. Your 3rd good player is in limbo until somebody decides whether he's going to jail or not. So now you need literally everything, but you have some extra picks to work with.
Yeah, that's
excellent.
Right.
We got rid of Tunsil and Cooks. What did we get back?
Draft picks.
Yeah, what are the picks?
Cooks can probably net you a second.
Okay.
And I think Tunsil might be able to net a first.
All right. Who would we have an extra first and an extra second? That's what we're working with here?
It'd be interesting to send Tunsil back to the Dolphins for one of those first-round picks, potentially. Cooks, okay. I'm trying to think of the teams that have the multiple first-round picks. The Eagles. Would the Eagles give up a middle first for Cooks? Probably not. Tunsil for a late first from the Dolphins.
I mean, it doesn't really matter. Let's just say we're now working with number 3 overall, somewhere in the middle of the first and an early second in addition. Like, that's what we got to fix the entire team.
Yeah, well, let's start with free agency. Here's what I think just needs to happen. To reiterate, last year at this time, they signed a lot of players, a lot of depth players, and several were on 1-year contracts, like Desmond King. They got a year of Desmond King, and he's gone. Also hitting free agency, Malik Collins and Neville Hewitt and Christian Kirksey and Jacob Martin. Like, all these guys are hitting free agency. None of them, they're not foundational pieces for your roster. So when I go to free agency this year, I need to sign young players that are going to be a part of my team in 2024, 2023 and 2024. So that has to be the way the Texans attack free agency this year. If they do it the same way they did last year, because you can't just only rely on the draft. The draft is going to be the key. It's the bottom of the pyramid. It's what you're building upon. I'm using foundation a lot, but it's your foundation. But you also need to find free agents that are going to be there 2 years from now, which they didn't do last year. So who are those guys? It literally is every position, though.
Yeah. I mean, you look at this depth chart and you're asking a genuine question of how many players that are on it right now are even part of any sort of future. Like, I'm sure there'll be a couple just because you typically don't turn over 100% of the roster in a couple of years. But there's very little in terms of players that you think will definitely be part of this thing going forward. I assume Marcus Cannon will be there for a while. I assume Nico Collins will be there for a while. Assuming we've traded away Brandon Cooks and Laremy Tunsil, obviously they won't be. Like, there's not that much there.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at our free agent list in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and just find the guys that are still in their 20s. And those are the types of players. Like, we've mentioned Michael Gallup a lot. We've mentioned Darius Williams at corner. And, I mean, those are the guys that can sign 4-year contracts and still be a part of this team in a couple of years. Like, you can't go to you can't just sign a whole bunch of special teamers again. DJ Reed, mention him again. He's 25. Christian Kirk's 25. Not that I probably don't want to spend top receiver money for him. DJ Chark's 25. I mean, those are the types of guys. Austin Corbett, starting guard, 26. That's where I'm going. It's literally every position, but I'm going for guys that are 25, 26 years old that I can sign to 4-year contracts at reasonable prices. Like, we've projected Austin Corbett to make go 4 years, $9.25 million. Yeah, that's the type of player I want, and it's got to be pretty much every position across the roster.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we can name all these guys, all these players of just these younger, potentially foundational pieces, guys that can be a part of this team going forward. But it is everything. It's every single position they need to hit. I mean, we had that email a while ago that was essentially asking, what did the Houston Texans actually achieve in the last 12 months other than the passage of time? They brought in all these guys from a year ago. They flipped a few of them for like 6th, 7th round draft picks. Most of the guys they brought in are not going to be part of this thing going forward. So they basically just killed some time. And they didn't really discover anything at the quarterback position. Davis Mills, flashed some ability, but not to the point where you'd be like, oh, that guy's a superstar. He's our franchise quarterback going forward. You're still in limbo with Deshaun Watson. We're just treading water here until I'm not sure what we're waiting for. Like, maybe it is for Deshaun Watson stuff to get worked out so that we can finally trade him for 3 first-round draft picks and then have like a real, keystone to build this entire revamp on top of. But right now it feels like the Texans are literally just treading water, waiting for something. Same thing with the head coaching deal, by the way. Like, again, for 2 years in a row, we've just called some people up, had some interviews, treaded and then we've just gone, not this year. Let's sign this dude and we'll just tread water and we'll do the whole thing again in a year's time. Like, the entire Texans franchise right now feels like it's treading water, waiting for something. And I have no idea what they're waiting for.
They also have 9 draft picks at the moment. I want to get to 15, whether it's through Tunsil and Cooks. I want to have 5 picks in the top 100, roughly 5 or 6 picks in the top 100, and just pick the best players. That's it.
So, like, the free agency, find young guys, pick your name, just grab a whole bunch of guys. What are they doing at number 3 in the draft?
I would feel best. I love Kyle Hamilton as a player. Something in me just doesn't want to take a safety in the top 5. I've seen him there. If Evan Neal's there, I probably feel comfortable with that. If Aiden Hutchinson's there, I feel comfortable with that. I'm trying to trade it as much as possible, but I don't think that whoever would need to trade up is the same dilemma I'm talking myself through. Who do you love enough, to draft there? We've talked about Derek Stingley a lot, but Lovie Smith is the coach. He runs a lot of cover 2. Cornerback's not a great fit there. So I don't love the spot at number 3 for the Texans, to be honest. But I think whatever you can do to get to 15 draft picks in this draft, whether it is trading down from 3 or whether it is the Cooks and Tunsil stuff. But I don't love the spot at 3 unless I know that Evan Neal or Aiden Hutchinson's going to be there. I'm going to wait on QB too. I'm going to wait on the quarterback position because that needs to be addressed. I'm not building around Davis Mills. I'm going to take another shot, but I would rather take a shot probably at 35 or if I trade down in the first round or pick up a mid-first round pick, that's where I'm going to take my quarterback.
To me, the fact that they need everything gives them a certain freedom to chase special with number 3 overall. Because you're not limited anymore by like, hey, we need to target these positions of value and blah, blah. You can just say, look, we have every single player we need. So tell me who's the special talent in this draft right now. And as much as generally speaking, safety is not a tremendously valuable position, if you find a dude that's legitimately special, he changes everything. And we saw that with the Seahawks for years with Earl Thomas. Like that guy was the thing that let that entire defense function, and nobody else has been able to replicate that defense to the same degree because nobody has had an Earl Thomas to make it work the same way. Kyle Hamilton might not turn out that way, but Kyle Hamilton has special ability. Like that guy leads this draft class in plays where he just pops up from absolutely nowhere and makes an insane play. Most of the time, drafting a safety that high, I think would be crazy, but Kyle Hamilton, I think, is the best safety prospect to come along in a long, long time and might change the entire math on that the way, a guy like Quentin Nelson changed the math on how high you can draft a guard. Yeah. So I think the Texans are in a rare position of like flexibility and sort of they're not burdened by, needing a couple of positions or having to stick to something. They can just go, tell me who the special talent is. I want to take him at number 3.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, he's 6'4", 220, incredible range, as you mentioned, can play deep, can play close to the line of scrimmage. I would hope that the Texans would tap into that versatility to maximize his ability. So, yeah, I think that's fine. You could talk me into that. Let's take Kyle Hamilton at 3, and let's attack free agency shrewdly, but with youth, and not just filling out a roster, but with people that are going to be there in a couple of years. Has to be the way to do it. And we're just going to, and I would trade Tunsil, trade Cooks, whatever happens with Watson, accumulate those picks, and just load up on the entire roster. QB, how are we addressing quarterback? And we'll wrap up the show.
I mean, again, because this is a multi-year project, this is not something that's getting fixed in one off season. I give the job to Davis Mills for next year. I have no problem letting him take a year, kind of like the Jalen Hurts thing for Philadelphia last season, right? Let's give him the season. We're not really expecting him to be the guy going forward, but if he proves us wrong, it's a good problem to have. So give Davis Mills the job. Let's see. You're probably assuming Davis Mills is not going to be the dude going forward, but if he shows, a jump forward in year 2 and looks better than he did year 1, then yeah, maybe he becomes your starting quarterback going forward.
All right, so I'll buy into that, and I'll say the second piece of that strategy, though, is let's assume we don't love one of these QBs. If one of those 5 top QBs is available at 35, I'm taking him. If Desmond Ridder is there, if Sam Howell's there, Kenny Pickett, any of those guys, if those quarterbacks drop, I will take them top of the second. Still roll with Davis Mills, but just at the off chance, it's the Drew Lock pick that I always say was the right process, right? You take the quarterback just in case, because he could be good. That's assuming we did get to those 15 draft picks.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't grab one just because, like, if any quarterback drops to that spot, grab one and we're good. Because this team is just a mile away from anything. So if one guy that you happen to love, but you didn't think was worth taking number 3 fell that far, sure, I can see an argument for that. But I wouldn't grab a quarterback just for the sake of grabbing a quarterback, because I think this is just he can't play. Like, you can't plug him in year one given the state of the current roster. So you're sort of taking him as the development. We sit for a year and then maybe, like, it just seems like a waste to me. So if a guy that you happen to think is amazing falls that far, sure, I don't have any problem with jumping on the value, but I wouldn't grab a quarterback at that spot just to grab a QB.
Well, fine. But you don't know. You don't know how your evaluation is. But yeah, I'm just saying, keep an eye on it. But there's nobody, I think, that's going to be, in play at 3 for the Texans. We'll see, though. So there we go. Fixed-ish. We'll just get them moving in the right direction this offseason. Anyway, thanks to everybody for tuning in. We made it through 8 teams. We have 24 to go. And these shows will be spread out over these next couple weeks. Don't forget the charity drive. Check out Sam's pinned tweet at PFF_Sam, and I'll get my charity up there as well, and we'll be dueling charities. We'll see how's this going to work now? Whoever raises the most has to go through the punishment? Yep. But the money still goes to both charities no matter what is raised, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I think strategically, I think I want to maybe earn like $1 less than you, but still a lot of money, right? That's what you're rooting for.
Well, it depends what your punishment is. On the other hand, if you want to raise the most money, you need to do the most, like, horrific thing possible.
True. Very true. Anyway, go check it out. Appreciate everybody. Anything else here, Sam?
No, I think we're good.
All right, we'll be back on Wednesday. Send us your emails, NFLpodcast@pff.com, and maybe we'll read it on air and answer your question. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you on Wednesday.